Hey everybody, welcome back to Skeptic Skeleton Sunday Streams, the series that I did a while ago and then stopped doing when I worked on a collab. But now it's back and better than ever. So this week we're going to probably get canceled and talk about representation and how that matters or doesn't matter or what it is as far as demographical representation of gender, ethnicity, all that stuff. I really feel that it's important to speak about this because I tend to find that this is an issue that is mostly one sided. So today we're going to be responding to Suris and his response to Appabend on the issue. Now, to be clear, I am not here to defend Appabend or anything of the nature. I am here simply to address some of the points that Cirrus makes for clarification purposes and to show how they might be a little bit confusing to someone who doesn't already agree with his opinions on the matter. So, let's get into it.
Who wants to take a minute to dial back to anti-SJW YouTube for a little while? Anyone? Because we got some modern day examples of this. This is a guy named Appenda, I believe. Let me double check and make sure that I've got that right. Appabend. There we go. Appabend. And we're just going to go ahead and watch it, but it is a critique of representation in video games, in media, in everything. So let's go ahead and roll with it and see what he's got to say.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. Representation is not a social empowerment movement. On paper, it sounds like a noble goal.
Now, before he explains, I just think that as coming in, trying to be as neutral a party as possible, I immediately am forced to ask what is representation and why does it sound like a good idea on paper? What is the practical, pragmatic benefit? Why should I support it or even care?
Seeing the people who have the same race, gender, ethnicity, nationality, skin color, etc. to be represented a lot more in popular media makes you feel empowered and feel that you can be on the same position as them in the future.
Now, I have a great degree of skepticism with this idea as it applies practically. The idea that it makes you feel any particular kind of way is sus, as the children would say. Why would seeing someone who looks like me do a thing automatically cause me to feel better or to feel like I can do the same things that they can do? If I had a gender and wasn't a skeleton and I was white, why would me seeing Donald Trump do the things that he does automatically make me feel good about myself and feel represented because Donald Trump is on TV and George Clooney is on TV and random white people are on TV, so that makes me feel better like I can do stuff? I don't see why that applies. I don't see how that works. I don't understand how that works. All of that is a very confusing mess, and it doesn't seem like there's an obvious correlation between how I feel about myself versus people on the screen who sort of kind of maybe look like me, or sort of kind of maybe have the same orientation I have, or sort of kind of maybe have the same identity that I have, and to derive my representation not from the person themselves, but from the artificial features about themselves that they can't control. Rather than relating to Moana because of who Moana is, I'm going to see Moana as a representation of me because she happens to look like me and have the same genitals. And that's a good thing for some reason, on paper. If I'm misunderstanding what representation is, and someone actually does bother to show up during the stream, please correct me, but so far, I'm not getting it.
In reality, however, it's just a stupid and narcissistic wish fulfillment fantasy from a bunch of intolerant brats in social media who claim to be oppressed.
Whoa, okay. I know Sirius is going to address him, but Jesus, I'm not a doctor, but I don't think it's healthy to have that much salt in your diet. Seriously. This does not come off as an unbiased perspective that genuinely is looking to discern the truth of the nature of representation. This doesn't look like someone who has everyone's best interest at heart and is genuinely interested in hearing out all sides. This sounds like someone who's salty and needed a platform to rant. And that's not really productive unless you just want to talk to people who agree with you and have them confirm how you already think.
Alrighty! That was a lot to unpack. So, let's go ahead and go with the first issue. He says, on paper, representation in media is good, and it's great to feel seen as a result of that. But
And I don't understand how Suris feels seen because Donald Trump is on television, but whatever. And yes, I'm just using that as an example. I'm not literally referring to Suris.
but in reality, it's just a social movement for a bunch of entitled brats who feel like they're oppressed. So I got a question. If a trans person is noting that there's no representation of them in media, and
Stop. Before we go any further, no representation of them in media. Which media? Where? When? Media is a mix of vastly different things. YouTube, CNN, and Fox News are technically all media platforms, but they are not all the same. Even within just the sphere of YouTube itself, there's so much variety here that it's very, very hard to come to a conclusion about that. Now, I understand Suris is not saying that there is literally absolutely zero representation of trans people in media, but the question that I'm trying to ask before we get into this is a clarification one. How does someone note what he said they note? How do you note that there's no representation in media everywhere? What's your definition of media? Which media are you consuming? When are you consuming it? Why are you consuming it? Lots of different questions need to be asked before I grant this presumption, even in a hypothetical, that someone just notes, there's no trans people in any media anywhere at all ever. I don't even know how one would investigate such a thing. So even in a hypothetical, I'm not convinced.
and a lot of our base prejudices and understandings of people come from the way they're represented in media.
Okay, that's an interesting claim. Citation. Are you going to back that up? Do you have anything to support that? Or is that just a thing that you're going to say that I'm expected to just believe? You can say that, but again, aside from the whole media is a very mixed pot and has lots of different kinds and types, and you can't really just say it's all the same thing as far as media goes. There are individuals that do not derive, or at least they claim not to derive, their opinions or base prejudices, as it were, about people from how they're portrayed in media. So this sounds like an absolutist statement to me, that this absolutely applies to everyone, and everyone gets their base prejudices and understandings from how they see things on media. They get their understanding of what a black person is based on the movie Friday and movies and representation similar to that. However, what if I were to tell you there were some people that don't do that? Then how do we know who does it and who does not? How do we know who does get their interpretations and understandings and biases and prejudices and all of that stuff? How do I know who gets their idea of a people, a minority, a demographic? How do I tell who does get that from media versus who doesn't? And if you want to say that absolutely everyone does, that's something you're going to have to substantiate and prove, because that is a very, very large absolutist statement.
And if a trans person is never represented ever in media at all, are they just an entitled brat for asking for them to be represented a little better?
Yes, they are. Because you are not entitled to representation. You are not owed representation. I'm not convinced that representation is necessarily an inherent good thing. And the thing I think Suris doesn't understand is the scale of the question you're asking. We are talking about a trans person. A trans person. he was very specific in bringing up a trans person because a trans person personally does not see trans representation in media. Therefore, media as a whole has to acquiesce to their demand and represent trans people a little better because this one person doesn't see representation in media at all ever. I don't know how else to demonstrate how entitled that sounds. That's the functional equivalent of me saying, I don't really see skeletons outside of Halloween. Why don't we have more skeletons around? I feel very uncomfortable about it. I need to see a skeleton win the World Series before I believe that I can do it. Even though the two things aren't really related at all. So, again, confusion. I will not go as far as to say wrong because I don't even know if we're in the realm of facts. I think we're still in the realm of opinions, but I see no valid reason to take this or anything else thus far at face value.
Because them having to explain themselves and how they exist.
Again, this is why this is on a stream, because I have to talk a lot and I have to pause a lot. They don't have to explain themselves and how they exist. That's the thing. Where is this a thing that they have to explain themselves? Now, if you were saying something along the lines of that there is a severe social pressure, or when they meet new people in a personal setting, there might be complications and difficulties that they might have to explain, but explain themselves and how they exist, I don't see this to be necessary. This isn't the case with women. They don't have to explain themselves and how they exist every time they come across a man or a child. Same thing with men. Same thing with white people, Asian people. Like, people don't introduce themselves by then explaining themselves and how they exist. Whatever that would even mean and whatever that would even entail. I don't see this as necessary. And I understand that being trans is different from those categories in that it's significantly less relevant. Most people are not trans, whereas most people are some kind of ethnicity. And I just don't necessarily believe that a trans person has to explain themselves and how they exist. They can just exist as the gender that they identify as, and that's it. And if they want to explain themselves to someone, that's fine, but I don't see a circumstance where that's absolutely necessary for them to do so. Unless freedom just isn't a thing.
Without something to compare it to in popular culture.
No, oh, wait, let's go back so we get the full dial.
Asking for them to be represented a little better. Because them having to explain themselves and how they exist without something to compare it to in popular culture can be hard.
Yes, and making a YouTube video can be hard. That doesn't mean that YouTube is under any obligation to make the process any easier. I don't see why it's relevant that a thing can be hard. And I don't see why society or media as a whole has to acquiesce to something, because otherwise it might be hard for trans people to explain themselves and how they exist when they don't really have to. Again, unless there's some great law that I'm unaware of, trans people don't owe anybody anything, so they don't have to explain themselves or how they exist. And I think it's dangerous to perpetuate the idea that they do, because then they're not perpetuating the idea that they're comfortable with who they are. They just are the gender that they identify. They just are a woman, or they just are a man. No, they are trans, and they have to explain being trans instead of just saying, hey, I'm a woman. I feel like I'm going to be doing this a lot, and I'm going to try not to be repetitive because that can get very boring, as if the stream isn't already boring. But which media? Which media influence? We're being very vague about the subject, and we're not speaking in any realm that's verifiable or in any realm that can actually be checked. We're just speaking in this vague hypothetical space about things and places with people and stuff, which is not at all descriptive.
Several examples.
Oop, let me go back so we get the full context.
In popular culture can be hard. If we look at media influence, we can find several examples where people's perceptions of a minority group were directly influenced or colored by the media that they consumed.
The media that they consumed. Okay, we're being a bit more specific. I mean, despite you saying there are several examples, you haven't brought up the examples, which I think would be much more effective to say, here's an example, rather than to say, there are several examples. But putting that issue aside for the moment, I still don't understand why that matters, and I still don't understand why the responsibility in that scenario is on the media rather than the individual. The Tide Pod challenge was a thing that happened. People attempted to eat Tide Pods. They put them in their mouth and attempted to eat them. And that became a social media challenge, and more people became encouraged directly to do that based on this social media challenge. Is it the responsibility of social media to, I don't know, censor that particular challenge, prevent it from spreading, prevent people from seeing it, knowing about it, hide it so that they don't do the stupid activity? Or possibly, maybe, is it the person's responsibility to not get their behavior from a social media challenge? Maybe it's the responsibility of the person to think for themselves and not just do what the challenge says. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the blame or the responsibility, as it were, seems to be misplaced to me. It doesn't seem that media needs to or ought to be held responsible for the behaviors of specific individuals when individuals should be held responsible for their own behaviors. There was a whole big hugabaloo regarding the Joker movie and its potential to create mass shootings. And if a mass shooting would have happened, does that mean that we have to pull the Joker screenings from existence? The movie has to cease to exist and it just must be erased because people are directly influenced from it. I don't know Suris's position on this, but I don't think Suris is the kind of person that would say, hey, we have shooters who played Grand Theft Auto. Their shooting skills and desires were directly influenced by the violent video game they were playing. Therefore, we have to get rid of the video game, or ban it, or it's bad, or any myriad of other things. Where does personal responsibility come into play in this dynamic or scenario? Because thus far, it doesn't really seem to, other than one person demanding something of an entire media.
It wasn't just about having an individual who could see themselves in media as a form of empowerment. It's all.
Even if it was about that, I find that to be irrelevant because I don't think that the media is under any obligation to empower anyone. Now, if you want to create your own media like BET and use that as a platform to promote, empower black people, you can do that. That is freedom. You can make your black entertainment television and go right ahead. But no one is under any obligation to forcefully create BET to appease someone who otherwise might have a hard time or might not be empowered. These are not things that you are owed, but these are very much things that you can get, and there's nothing wrong with having them. There's just something wrong with demanding them.
Also about having positive representation of you as a person in media so that the people around you do not have negative connotations or associations where you are concerned.
Yes, but this assumes that the media around you affects people to that degree, and again removes the aspect of personal responsibility. People don't think for themselves. They don't make their own decisions. They just watch Boys in the Hood and then they presume that every black person functions in that manner. And in that case, I would say it's the person's responsibility for doing something stupid and they should not do the stupid thing rather than the responsibility of Boys in the Hood to just not exist as a media because people get their perceptions of black people from that. That is where it is an unreasonable request of media. You have to take down this movie, this film, that film, or add people in this movie, this film, that film, because it will affect the perception of people around me and how they treat me. If people around you are treating you based off of things they see in media rather than based off of you, those are not the kind of people you want in your life. Those are not the kinds of people you want to associate with. And in the rare instances that you have to associate with them, how they see you should not matter. The business that you have to engage with together, that is what matters. It doesn't matter that they think you're like a super hood person, or they think you can speak Spanish because they saw a movie once where Hispanic individuals were speaking Spanish. None of that matters if you are working in a mailroom, or working as garbage people, or working in a company. And I understand biases influence things like wages and things like promotions and things of that nature. And I'm not saying that that's not important, but for the most part, that is still a side issue. We can get into a discussion about wages and how they're gotten and all that stuff in a separate video. Right now, this is about merely the representation in the media itself. And I don't see the media as having any sort of obligation to anyone, let alone everyone. And it seems unreasonable to demand the media change to appease you, or appease a group that you think should be appeased.
This is an issue that we have where when
This is something that you think is an issue. I'm not convinced that it's an issue, and you haven't made a sufficient case that it's an issue, but I guess it's an issue.
somebody says that, say, they're gay, and they don't have, I'm gonna do a very offensive stereotype for a second, but they don't have, the lith, and they don't have, like, the girl best friend, and they don't have, like, the gay. When they don't have any of that, right? Our media is what largely let that stereotype prevail.
Okay, that's another thing that I might need you to substantiate. And I'm not saying you can't find a lot of examples of that in media. You probably could, but you just saying it on its own is not proof. You just saying it on its own is not evidence. You just saying it on its own is not enough. As if to imply that there is a stereotype of gay people rather than a variety of stereotypes of gay people. When stereotypes tend to exist in varieties, there's not a single stereotype about Asians, there are multiple. There's not a single stereotype about black people, there are multiple. Whether it's referring to genitals, or them being hoodlums, or any number of other things. The point that I'm making here is that you actually have to demonstrate, at least in part, some of the things that you are saying. Yes, does that stereotype that you described with the lisp, the girl best friend, the wrist thing, do those things exist in media? Yes. However, to say that most people then get their understanding of what it means to be gay from that is, again, to blame social media for the Tide Pod challenge instead of the stupid people who decided to eat the Tide Pods. If you decide to color your perception of this is what gay must be because I saw it on a TV show, that is not a fair way to assess people's character. That is not a fair way to come to an understanding of what gay is, because TV shows do not have the authority to declare what a minority is and is not. And my point in saying all of this is to say that if you listen and believe something without actually checking and investigating, it's not the fault of the thing, it's your fault for not being skeptical. I am not going to be credulous enough to watch a movie and assume anything about any race, gender, identity, or anything like that because, oh, well, I saw how Phoebe acts on Friends, so that must be how all blonde white women act because I saw it in a movie. That would be stupid of me, and it would not be the responsibility of Friends to adjust Phoebe's character to appease my stupidity. It would be my responsibility to not be stupid and not to make conclusions about an entire race and or gender identity based on a character in a movie or a series of characters in a series of movies or a series of films or a series of video games or a series of whatever. Again, I fail to see the distinction between this and the Tide Pod Challenge, the Cinnamon Challenge, the Kylie Jenner cup lip thing challenge, any challenge you can think of. I fail to see the difference here and why the responsibility would be on social media as a whole to change, to appease the behaviors of stupid people. Also, I'm not necessarily convinced that this is where all of that comes from. And by that, I mean different prejudices, biases, racism, sexism, all that stuff. I'm not convinced that that's the sole or even a primary source of that. I am fairly certain that when someone decided to be a white supremacist, it wasn't because of a movie they saw involving black people or because of how they saw black people being portrayed in media. It was probably because of some idea that they heard being espoused and believed for whatever reason. So I don't think it's a matter of if we just make black people look better in media, the white supremacists will go away, because they won't. I don't think that they will, and I don't think that there's anything you can do to get rid of them. I don't think there's any particular representation you can put of a gay person that's going to make all of the problems or any of the problems even go away. If you think that that is an offensive, stereotypical representation of a gay person, how would you represent a gay person? Because if you represent a gay person just like everyone else and they just so happen to be gay by the way, then that doesn't sound like representation. That sounds like tokenism. It sounds like them being gay has nothing to do with anything, but we just have to throw that in there to make people feel better, which is apparently a bad thing from what the internet tells me. Tokenism is a bad thing. So then, how ought people be represented? If you are under the presumption that representation is a good thing and ought to be the case, how ought people be represented? And how did you decide how people ought to be represented? Because there seems to be a lot of thought that needs to go into this that isn't being clearly demonstrated to a neutral party. As someone who doesn't agree with either of you as of right now, I'm not convinced by either of you or anything either of you have said.
The idea that a gay person could be identified by these factors, and while there are some people who do have, these factors associated with themselves and are gay, this...
Now, I'm going to have to stop you right here as well, because this is also a problem. So you acknowledge the fact that there are gay people who are like this, that this stereotype has a degree of accuracy. Now, those gay people might feel accurately represented by that stereotype in media. They might feel empowered to see someone who looks like them and acts like them in media, in movies, in films, in video games, and things like that. So how can you then say that that is an offensive stereotype that then needs to be removed? This is the problem. When we're not dealing with concrete scientific matters, we run into this problem with social issues of you declare that to be bad representation and someone else declares that to be good representation, and I have no idea who to believe. I have no idea who's right, if anyone is even right in this circumstance. And you do not make a very strong case when you simply say that it's offensive, or you simply say that it doesn't represent all gay people, when in fact it represents some of them, and some of them who are represented by that might like it. So what do? We can't represent every possible shade of variation of every possible human being. We can't represent every possible personality, every possible gender identity, interpretation, and every variation within that. We cannot do it. It is not reasonable or feasible to expect media to have every single idea of how a woman can be represented. It's not feasible. It's not feasible for Friends to have every woman of every race, every gender identity, every disability, everything, and then within those subsets have every different kind of personality that they can have within those subsets. It's just not reasonable. Or at least I'm having a very difficult time understanding how it could be reasonable. So, all that being said, what's the goal here? What are we striving towards? What are we trying to get at? Are we trying to get a representation that you think is good and that you like? Are we trying to get a representation that people who think like you or agree with you think is good and is right? Why is that the goal we ought to be striving towards? I don't see why we need to change anything. I don't see the problem, let alone a pragmatic way to fix it. So that's where I am, and we're only 3 minutes in, so this is going to be a long one.
This is not a way to clock gay people. It just doesn't work that way.
Says you, the gay people who do act like that and possess the features you mentioned them possessing might feel differently. How do you tell them that they're wrong?
So, when you have these bits of representation, when I grew up, the way that we figured out, the way that we.
I'm going to stop right here because when I grew up is already a problem. This isn't about you, but for some reason you think it is because you brought yourself into this and you said, well, when I grew up, this is how I did it, or this is how we did it. This isn't about you. This is supposed to be a discussion about representation in media in general, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, what it is, how it functions, how we can improve it, should we improve it. That's where the discussion lies. Yet for some reason, you've decided to trail off into some anecdote about how you personally do things. And I don't care if you personally decided to eat a Tide Pod because you saw a Tide Pod commercial. That doesn't mean that it's media's responsibility to get rid of Tide Pods in commercials because you saw one and you were stupid enough to go, I saw that. That makes me want to eat one.
We figured somebody was gay was if they did that. If they had those mannerisms.
Okay, now, a couple of things. First of all, as you clearly demonstrated or admitted yourself, sometimes that's not inaccurate. Sometimes that is an accurate way to tell. But additionally, as an aside to that, this is what I meant when I was rambling about the anecdote earlier. Why do I care how you and whomever you're referring to came to conclusions about whether or not someone was gay? Just because you couldn't assess people for their personalities and you got your understanding of gay from stereotypes doesn't mean that everyone does. This sounds awfully similar to projection, and like you're projecting your life and your experiences onto most everyone else, and you're like, well, that's how I did it, so that must be how everyone's doing it. So clearly, instead of holding people responsible and teaching them to not judge entire demographics by their media presentation, instead of doing that, we're going to try to control all of the media representation and make it all good, whatever that even means.
Yeah, the soft wrist. That was what we used. Let's say that you're an autistic.
Yes, you used the soft wrist, but that's because you were being fucking stupid. And it's not media's responsibility to remove the soft wrist because you're too stupid to say, hey, this is media. This is not always an accurate representation of reality. It's not media's responsibility to make Will Smith less of a badass because then you might think that all black people are badasses. There's no correlation. I don't see any correlation. I don't see any connection between the media and the way in which people treat other people. I see a way in which people do that. I see the connection that you made where you decided how you were going to behave, but that was on you, not media. It wasn't media's fault for featuring the gay person in the way that they did. It was your fault for looking at and going, I'm just going to listen and believe to whatever I see in the media and make that projection about gay people, as if it's the projection's fault instead of your fault for making the projection. But let's continue. Let's see if we can try to make it through this half-hour thing.
Person. And you have a hard time explaining to somebody that you're autistic.
Okay. Go on, I guess.
And I don't remember what the movie was that came out recently that did a super poor representation of what an autistic person was.
How do you decide whether or not a representation is poor or not? You have not set the paradigm, so I don't know what that means. When you say that representation is super poor, I don't know what that means, especially when, if the internet is to be believed, autism is a spectrum, and thus representation of it would also be a spectrum. So how could you poorly represent a spectrum unless you just didn't feature all aspects of the spectrum? Which brings me back to the whole, is it realistic to try to portray every type of woman in existence thing? Is it realistic to try to portray every type of autistic person? Is it realistic as far as pragmatically able to portray every type of insert thing here. Because I don't know if it is or isn't, but I see no good reason to think that it is.
But like the frame of mind, the frame of reference that somebody has for what an autistic person is based on that media.
Is it? I mean, you can say that, but I don't necessarily believe it because you said it. And even if it was, again, why is it the media's fault that you eat Tide Pods? And I'm trying not to be repetitive, and if this video does get too repetitive, I am going to cut it short. But stop blaming Tide Pod commercials for the Tide Pod challenge. If people make their own stupid decisions, they need to be held responsible for that. And if media encourages them to do the stupid things, the people should be taught how stupid they're being instead of the media being changed or shut down.
That they've consumed. So it was music. Now when you tell somebody, oh, I'm autistic, they're going to view you as somebody who's lesser. They're not going to...
How do you know that? That's just making a blanket assumption about somebody that you've never met. You're assuming somehow, for some reason, that me, for example, I would assume that someone who said they were autistic is automatically lesser. But you don't know me. You don't know my experience. You don't know my background. You don't know which media I consume. So you have no grounds to say how random people are going to respond to someone saying they're autistic, at least as you present it here. I'm not saying that's not true, and I'm not saying there isn't a way to present that information, but I'm saying you haven't done it in a convincing way. You just say things, and we're supposed to just believe you. So far, that seems to be the tone of the video, which is odd, because if you've watched Suris's videos or video responses, he's awfully interested in research, yet for some reason, not so much in this case.
Like me, who's just different. No, they're...
How do you know that that's not what they're going to do? Is that what you do? Because I don't think that it is. And if it's not what you do, why are you assuming that other people do it? Why are you making assumptions about how other people necessarily will treat someone who says they're autistic? Different people are different. Is it not conceivable that some people might treat someone who's autistic that way, and also some other people might not do that? What if I did that exact thing that you said wouldn't happen? What if I just said, oh, they're a person like me, but just like different? Which, again, could be applied to anyone and everyone. So, also, I just want to clarify something. Like, what's the request in this scenario? Is it not to see the autism? Or are you trying to tell us how to see the autism? Or what? And that's a genuine, curious question. I don't do gotcha questions on this channel. Every question I expect a legitimate, or I ask legitimately and want a legitimate answer to, not to be like, gotcha.
They're going to view you as somebody who's lesser than them, who's got a myriad of issues that they have to deal with.
Again, I don't know how you know this. You kind of just say this and say that this is how people treat autistic people without presenting any evidence, so I'm not going to believe you until you present sufficient evidence, which you have not, because you're just saying things at this point.
If you're watching, you're playing the Resident Evil games, and the only way that you can conceive of a trans person is Alfred Ashford from Code Veronica,
then you're fucking stupid, and you shouldn't be getting your perceptions of trans people from a video game. That's what you're going to say, right? Please tell me that's what you're going to say. Please tell me you're going to encourage that people be skeptical rather than encourage media to just not put out dumb messages.
Your view of that person is going to be of a mentally unstable asshole who's willing to commit genocide to keep their delusions in place.
Yes, and that's stupid to believe. So, the goal should be to tell people, hey, it's a fucking video game. It's Resident Evil. Zombies aren't real. Don't believe what you see in a video game. But, according to you, that's what people do. People seriously play the Resident Evil. I'm gonna get canceled by the gamers. I can feel it. I can feel it coming. Resident Evil series people who get their interpretations about reality from that series, it's not their fault for being stupid and getting their understanding about reality from something that is so obviously fictional. It is the fiction's responsibility to be more accurate. They need to have more accurate autistic people because people are going to blindly absorb whatever message they come across. So we have to change the messages rather than equip people with skepticism. And I do not think that that is pragmatic nor beneficial, especially when what counts as a good message, what counts as not poor representation, is subjective. I don't know how we achieve that subjective goal and also don't sound entitled.
Because that's who Alfred Ashford was. When you have media that only negatively represents you, or doesn't represent you at all.
Again, I don't know how you tell whether or not a person, minority, group, thing is only being represented negatively or not being represented at all. I don't know how you come to the conclusions that you come to. You haven't explained anything. We're just sort of operating under the assumption that you can come to these conclusions and that we know what these subjective terms mean, which I personally don't.
That has an effect on culture. It has an effect on how people perceive those around them in society.
Does it? Because you can say that it does, but saying something doesn't make it true, and this is starting to get incredibly repetitive.
It's not just about you as an individual, it's also about other people's perceptions of you.
And controlling other people's perceptions of you, which is your responsibility or media's responsibility or someone's responsibility. People aren't responsible for their own perceptions. The media is responsible for their perceptions, and the media is responsible for controlling those perceptions. Is that it? Is that the point? Because that's the message I'm getting thus far. I don't know for sure if that's what you're intending to say, but that's the message that's coming across, is that we need to control the way people think through media.
The implications of all of these demands are genuinely disturbing to me. It implies that people can only relate to characters if they have the same physical characteristic systems.
Physical characteristics, gender identity, genitals, different things like that. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I don't think that wanting more representation automatically necessarily implies that that's the primary or only way that a person can relate or be represented, but it doesn't encourage the idea that people can be represented by people who look different than them or have different features than they do or things like that. So charitably, I understand what he's trying to get at, which is to say, to promote the idea that representation is as essential as you think it is to tell trans people, minorities, anybody, that you can't relate to these people because they look different than you and they have different identities and they have different characteristics. You can't relate to them based on ideas or experiences. You can only relate to the people that look like you, or you primarily relate to the people who look like you. That empowerment must come from representation of skin color, ethnicity, gender, all that stuff, as opposed to representation of ideas. So again, charitably, that's what I think appabend means, but let's see what Suris has to say in response.
No, that's not what it says. You can relate to a character without having the same physical characteristics of them. I relate to a character like Samus Aran, who is constantly faced with shit and is constantly having to be silent about the stuff that they're faced with until they finally have the opportunity to engage in a mental breakdown after all the stuff they've had to deal with, say, in Other M. I can identify with that type of person who has to basically play the stoic, even though I'm not like Samus. I'm not a 6'4" tall blonde woman in stilettos.
Okay, so what you're saying is people do not need representation to relate to people, and people do not need representation in order to feel empowered. So then why do they need it? The answer thus far sounds like to control the perceptions of people around them, but that would be authoritarian, which isn't necessarily bad. I'm just trying to understand.
That's not me, but I can still identify with that character. It's not that you can only identify with that character. It's that there are parts of your experience that are rooted in those physical traits.
Okay, but that's something that you would have to demonstrate. There are lots of people with the same physical attributes and identities that have vastly different experiences. Milo Yiannopoulos, as a gay person, has vastly different experiences than, I don't know, what's the guy on CNN's name? Can't think of the name. I can't think of his name. But the guy on CNN who mostly does the questioning and the interviewing and things like that. He has the silver white hair, white guy. I can't think of his name, and just by describing him, I'm probably racist, but you get the point. My point is, Milo Yiannopoulos doesn't automatically represent gay people, and there isn't something unique. There is not this gay experience that gay people go through, because different gay people go through different experiences. And I think that it's bad to perpetuate the idea that there is a gay experience, that there are things linked to your experience, that there are experiences linked to physical attributes about yourself, when A, you haven't demonstrated that, and B, people with those attributes have a wide variety of experiences, not all of which can be represented.
Let's say that you're a black person.
Okay.
And you're watching Prince of Bel-Air.
The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. How dare you desecrate the name of that show? We can throw hands.
There are bits of your experience that are probably going to mirror what Will Smith's character ends up going through.
Okay. Citation? Citation? Proof? Evidence? Something? Are we actually going to behave like skeptics here, or are we actually just going to believe whatever you say? Because that's what we're doing. At this point, I'm failing to see a significant distinction between your video and Apaben's video, because you're both just saying things rather than demonstrating anything, rather than proving anything. What good reason would I have to believe that a person's experience would be mirrored by Will Smith's experience? How do I know that? How do we demonstrate that? How do we prove that? What about people who look like Will Smith and have had a complete opposite experience to his, or have never experienced any of the things that he's gone through? Is that just not possible? Do the rules of reality just not allow for that? I'm really trying to be open-minded with the subject matter, but you're not making a very strong case. You're not sufficiently even explaining what Will Smith's experience is and why black people would automatically probably relate to it. You just say it and then move on. And if you're actually a skeptic, you would know that this is not a way to convince or get people to understand unless they already enter the conversation understanding and agreeing with you.
Somebody who knows what it's like to live in poverty knows what it's like.
What? You're making assumptions about what now? Because the connection between Will Smith and a black person is that they're black. And you're assuming that poverty is a part of the black experience, and you haven't demonstrated that it is. You haven't proven that it is. You haven't substantiated that position. You just said that it is. And this is you doing the thing that you have a problem with. If I were to just unskeptically believe you, I would go, oh, being poor is part of the black experience, so that is something I'm now going to take with me and enter every conversation with a black person under that presumption that they're black. Poverty is probably figured in their life somewhere, when I don't see any valid reason that that necessarily must be the case, or even probably is the case. I'm not addressing even the points at this point. I'm addressing the lack of evidence and the poor explanation of the points. I can't even evaluate if the things you're saying are right or wrong, because you're just saying things and then moving on. You're not proving anything. And again, this is getting really, really repetitive, really, really fast. Regardless, I'm going to watch the entirety of the video. I'm going to do that for full context, but it's incredibly difficult when it's getting incredibly repetitive.
To be profiled by the police, knows what it's like to be screwed over by the system itself.
What system? There are various systems in America. To say that one is screwed over by the system which system? We're having the exact same problem we had with media here. You throw out a term without defining it and expect people to understand, know what it means, and believe you. How do you know that being screwed over by the system is a part of the black experience? How do you know that being arrested by the police is part of the black experience? Again, there are so many assumptions in here that just aren't substantiated and aren't justified that I fail to see the difference between you and the offensive stereotypes that you seem to take issue with. Whether you intend to or not, right now, you are painting a representative picture of the black experience. You are teaching people what a black person is and how they exist. And I see no valid reason to just listen and believe you. And that's the problem. You don't want skepticism to be increased. You don't want people to arm themselves. You don't want people to see black people as unique individuals with unique stories and unique lives and unique experiences. You want them to see them as this rather than that. You want to change what the message is rather than how people consume the message. You're fine with people unskeptically watching something and drawing their conclusions about a demographic based on media. That's not the problem to you. The problem to you is what it is that they're drawing. If the message in the media was good, you don't have any problem with them not being skeptical and just believing whatever they see. If you agree with the message, if you think the message is good, if you think the message is an accurate representation of insert group here, and that is the problem. Why should I, someone who is, as best I can, trying to be a neutral party and engage with the subject with an open mind, why should I believe you? Why should I take anything you say seriously? Why should I care about the message that's being put out rather than how accurate that message is? And why should I care about making other people's messages accurate as opposed to teaching people how to evaluate messages? Which do you think is more effective when you're debunking a Christian video? To complain about the Christian video making broad assumptions, or to teach people how to face the video? To say that Christianity should be told this way instead of that way? Is that more effective than just saying this is how you skeptically approach something and then letting people make their own decisions? Because I would think it'd be healthier and better in general. But I digress. Let's get back to it.
You are likely going to be able to identify that with that much better because this is a person who looks like they do have your lived experience.
Looks like they do have your lived experience. What does that mean? What does it mean for someone to look like they have your lived experience when your lived experience is very specific? Unless you're just saying that the lived experiences of black people are one and the same. Because they're either one and the same or they're different. And if they're different, how can you make a broad assumption about their relatability like you are? And if they're one and the same, how are you not doing the thing that you don't like being done by media?
Even if they are a fictional character. It doesn't mean you cannot identify with somebody without them looking like you. That's not the implication. The implication is that it is easier for people to identify that way.
Okay, but why do I care what's easier for people? This is another thing that you kind of bring up. Something is hard, therefore we have to change it. Some things are easier, therefore we have to do that. I'm not convinced that that necessarily even is easier just because you say it is. Because that's where we are right now. We're just assuming that it's easier for people to relate to someone that looks like them because Suris said so.
There's nothing wrong with that.
So I assume that there are loads and loads of people in America who don't understand the concept of human empathy and cannot relate to characters because they don't have the same race system.
That's not what it means, dumbass.
Let's take a favorite film of mine, like Die Hard. Man, I cannot relate to the struggle of a police officer trying to survive a group of terrorists. Why? Because he's white, that's why.
No, that's not what that means. That is a straw man of the representation argument.
Okay, that might be a straw man of your particular position, but it's important to note that there are other people who have vastly different conceptions of what representation is, and some of them might be to the extreme degree that he's addressing. We don't know that. I don't think it's fair to call it a straw man quite yet just because he's not directly talking to you. I'm not calling you a straw man just because there are lots of other people who make lots of different other arguments. I don't think I can just say, well, that's not the anti SJW position, whatever that means. Therefore, you're attacking a straw man because you're not talking to me, Skeptic Skeleton, in particular.
Dear God.
If I said that, I'll be showered with praise by the progressive media, but
No, you wouldn't. You would
Would
probably
I?
be lambasted for engaging in a straw man.
Would I? Or would he? Hold on one second. Living in a house with other skeletons is a very difficult thing. Now, let's go back a little bit and get back to the actual point we're supposed to be talking about.
A straw man of the representation argument. Dear God.
if I said that, I'll be showered with praise by the progressive media, but
If he said what? Let's go back a little bit. I don't get it. Oh, the thing about him being white. Got you.
A straw man of the representation argument.
Is it? Again, you say the representation argument as if there aren't variations of the representation argument, and I don't know how you know he isn't addressing one of those as opposed to this. This is like someone trying to defend feminism when someone is criticizing TERFs, and it's like, you can't criticize them because that's a straw man. That's not what feminism is. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is that I'm criticizing TERFs, not feminism in general. And it could be that he's criticizing people making that specific argument rather than assuming everyone is making that specific argument. It could be that he's talking to everyone named Suris, not assuming everyone's name is Suris.
Dear God.
if I said that, I'll be showered with praise by the progressive media, but
No, you wouldn't.
Okay, how do we know he would or wouldn't? Because we've got no metric right now. We're just assuming things.
You would probably be lambasted for engaging in a straw man.
Lambasted by who?
Because that's what you're doing.
if the demands
That's what you think he's doing, but that's not what you've demonstrated he's doing, so that I have no good reason to believe that's what he's doing, other than that's what you're saying that's what he's doing.
are towards foreign films or films starring people who are not white, people are gonna throw a massive fit. Oh no, this film about a person struggling to get a job and surviving in the urban environment at large? That's not relatable to me and my family, who was also surviving in the urban environment. Why? Because the person is black. Oh no, this film about characters overcoming their poverty is something that me and my family can relate to, but I can't because they're Koreans.
That's not the argument, dude. I don't know how many times I have to say it.
Yes, but who said that that was the argument? Again, this is him addressing a particular argument. If this is not the argument that you're making, why are you responding to this video? If someone is criticizing TERFs and you identify as a feminist but you're not a TERF, why are you out here defending TERFs trying to rephrase their arguments as something different? Because that's what you are doing. You are jumping in and saying that my argument for representation is the argument for representation, and if you're not criticizing or responding directly to my representation argument, then you're attacking a straw man, and that's not fair.
The argument is not that you cannot relate to somebody like this. The argument is that A, it is easier to relate to them,
And you have not demonstrated that or proven that. You just said that it's easier to relate, but even then, why should people care? Why should the media care? Why should that be a relevant point in an argument? It's easier to relate to someone if we make them look like you. So what? You can still relate to them regardless. So why do we need to make that experience easier for you? Why is that at all necessary or even worthwhile? I'll admit that that can be good, I guess, to some people, but why is that good overall to everyone and something that media in general should be trying to cover? Whatever media in general is, but we've been over that.
B, there are aspects of that. You know what? Let me make this super easy.
Okay.
were ever represented in media were as money-hungry, laundering bankers, what would you assume a Jewish person was?
I would not make any assumptions about a Jewish person based on how they are represented in TV because I understand the difference between media representation and living, breathing human beings. If the only time you ever heard of Tide Pods was people eating Tide Pods, would you then start fucking eating a Tide Pod? Would you then start thinking that it was edible? Or would you actually do research into what a Tide Pod is before you just engaged in the random challenge? This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. You're not encouraging skepticism of individuals. You're not encouraging people to be more skeptical of ideas. You're encouraging ideas to just be different. People can be unskeptical. People can just listen and believe to things. We just have to change the messages they listen and believe rather than increase skepticism and hopefully help them make more informed decisions, even if they're decisions that I disagree with. But no, that's not the goal. Control them through media. Control their perceptions of people through media. Again, to say that is also a very extreme example because that's something you have to demonstrate. To say that this is the only representation when there are different types of media, which you kind of acknowledged when you said the type of media you grew up watching, and I assume you didn't grow up watching every type of media, every news channel, every news station, every TV show, what have you. So, I don't see the point. And perhaps that is the point, is that I don't see the point. But I don't think that this demonstrates the benefits of representation at all. It just makes it sound authoritarian and controlling, and we need to control the message that the masses listen to because they're just going to listen and believe, rather than trying to teach the masses not to listen and believe. Even you. Yes, you. The person listening to me, well, let me check the stream, all 0 of you watching, don't believe me. Do your own research. Watch this video in its full entirety and get the context and do your own research and make your own decision. Don't believe me. Don't just accept the message that I'm putting across. Use your skepticism to think about the things that I'm saying and come to your own informed decision. I'm going to tell you that. I'm fairly certain Suris won't. But let's see if I'm wrong. He hasn't thus far, but I could be wrong.
Your assumption of a Jewish person would be based largely in their love for money.
Assuming that I consumed that type of media and assuming that I was fucking stupid and decided that people must be the way they are in media, which is a stupid assumption to make. Again, I don't know how else to do that. If the only time I saw Tide Pods was in the Tide Pod Challenge, and then I decided from that Tide Pods must be edible, no, that's fucking stupid. And that's not a thing that you should do. We should encourage people to stop doing that. Do not do that. Do not read Mein Kampf and just believe what's in it. Be skeptical of it. Rather than, hey, let's just delete Mein Kampf from history and make all the Jews are good people stuff.
This actually was kind of the case.
Okay, citation please.
This was the butt of a lot of jokes, to the point
the butt of a lot of jokes and almost all representation are not the same thing. Jokes are jokes, and jokes by their very nature are not meant to be taken as literal serious statements. So what do jokes have to do with this? Someone makes a Jew joke, therefore we're going to make our assumptions based on Jews? Someone makes a joke about black people and fried chicken, and then from that people assume that all black people like fried chicken? Therefore, we need to stop making that joke? Again, I'm still not sure what the problem is, nor am I sure as to how we go about correcting it. What is the argument in favor of, exactly?
Where I knew people who, if they found out somebody was Jewish, they would do things like take change out of their wallet and throw it on the ground, expecting them to run and scrounge for it.
Okay, were you one of those people? Or were you smarter than that and you knew better than to make assumptions like that? Did you teach those people to be smarter? Or did you go complain on the internet that there was a movie that did that and we need to get the movie canceled or something? I'm trying to figure out how you actively go about solving this thing that you think is a problem. These people have a faulty assumption about an entire group of people. And so your response is, well, we need to make the other people look better, so then people won't do that. As if people won't have negative associations and negative stereotypes and all those things if everyone in the media is portrayed as good and great and wonderful and has accurate representation, whatever that means.
Because, I mean, they were groveling, money-hungry assholes. That's what Jews were.
No, that's what you, or rather, that's what those people thought they were. And again, what we should be doing in this scenario is, hey, that's stupid. It's being stupid. You're making assumptions about an entire group of people based on media when there's no evidence to suggest that just because it's on media means that it's true. We should be putting that message across. But instead, we're like, hey, media, don't make jokes about things, because people might take those things seriously and then act stupid in public. And again, the Jewish person might have been offended by this. They might have had their feelings hurt. I might be willing to grant that. But did it really hurt their lives? Were they unable to feed their families? Were they unable to pursue happiness because of this? Or is it just a thing that some people do that's mean sometimes? Because I'm trying to determine the difference between the two, because they're not the same. Is this a serious problem that prevents people from living their lives in the happiest way possible? Or is it just a thing that happens sometimes and hurts people's feelings? As far as what the problem is.
According to a lot of things they had seen in media.
A lot of things that they had seen in media that I'm not going to bother to actually bring up. Again, this is very convenient. I have citations, but I'm not going to tell you what they are type of situation. So I have no reason to believe that this was the case, but it's not relevant to the main point, so I don't really care what media representation was in the 90s. I care about what it is now, because that's what we can control. We can't control that. So let's focus on now, please, and thank you.
That was what prevailed.
And you know this how? Were there no people that treated Jews with kindness? Were there no people that treated Jews differently? Hell, there were people that did their best to try to save Jews during the Holocaust. I'm not convinced that there weren't people doing kind things or treating Jewish people kindly knowing that they were Jewish in America. I'm not convinced that this necessarily was the case. Neither that their media representation was what you say it was, nor that therefore because of that media representation, the majority of people behave that way. Just because you knew some asshole who did that doesn't mean that everyone or most people were assholes who were going to do that in a given situation. But again, we're still at projection. This thing happened in my life. I seen it. Therefore, objective reality functions as the way this one thing happened that one time. And again, you can cherry pick a lot of examples. I'm not saying you can't. But no matter how many examples you cherry pick, that's not going to equal data. No amount of anecdotes will end up equaling data. No amount of Christian anecdotes will end up being data for God's existence. And the same applies here.
There are negative stereotypes that can get associated with someone when they are not put in a protagonistic sense.
Yes. But so what?
Instead, we see them in a negative light, or even with negative connotations.
Okay, perhaps you might do that, but how do you know that's what we do? Because that's not what I do. I tend to come into conversations and media as neutral as possible and try to make as few assumptions as possible. And I think we should encourage people to do that instead of whatever it is that you're doing.
It's not just that a bunch of narcissistic SJWs on the internet really want to be seen in media or film.
Is it not? Because right now I can't see the difference between that and the arguments that you're trying to make.
It's that media exposure, media has consequences.
I don't deny that media does have consequences, but I also think that people have consequences. And I think that people need to be held responsible for their own actions far more than change the media to be what I think it should be. Because so far, the goal of this argument, its purpose, its function, that's what it seems to be. Make the media the way that I think it is, or I think it should be. If that's not, please correct me. What specifically is the media's goal? Not just portray people better or accurately, because people have a wide variety of experiences. What exactly do you want to see when you turn on your television screen?
There's implications to what makes it into the social zeitgeist.
Yes, but the social zeitgeist is subject to criticism and should always be scrutinized, never just mindlessly believed. I don't deny that movies have messages and that movies have connotations surrounding characters and different things like that. Most, if not every movie has a point to it. But that doesn't mean that we mindlessly accept the point, that we assume points that are not explicitly stated, or that we just say, hey, let's use that social zeitgeist to control people's perceptions and make them like a demographic. Because that seems to be the goal.
But please continue to educate me with your big brain.
Yeah, you're educating me with your big brain, so apparently that's an effective strategy.
Is that how Americans think? Because I'm starting to feel that that's how Americans think, or at least how the corporate executives think Americans think. I think this is precisely why there are so many goddamn Hollywood remakes of foreign films. It's because Americans cannot comprehend the concept of relating towards characters who don't have the same physical characteristic as them.
This man is going off, and this man is going off for some reason. I mean, so far, all he's done is make a bunch of vague statements and assume that the liberal media would agree with him. So far, he hasn't provided any actual evidence of anything or substantiated anything. I'm talking about Appaben right now. He hasn't done anything besides show this background footage of a video game I wish I were playing and complain. That is the full extent of the video thus far. I like to point out that as far as Suris's video is concerned, that's also basically what's happened. You have two people bickering and complaining on the internet. No one's substantiating anything they're saying. They're just saying, "Look at me, I'm right." No, you're not. I'm right, and you're making a straw man.
Or even spoken the same language.
So, for one, why do we have films that get remade by Americans to have our people in them? Basically, yes, there is an aspect of it where people do find themselves to be more relatable to people who look like them. It's almost like you found the plot finally. So,
yes, and that plot does not seem to be a good one, or one that we should feed into, or one that is positive in any sense. Not even one that's been substantiated. It's just a plot that you sort of say exists, and we should lean into it because reasons. Otherwise, people might have it hard, and God forbid people have things hard. The media has to make things easy because...
Secondly, there is an aspect of the ability to consume media. It's harder for people to consume foreign media or to even be incentivized to consume foreign media if they are not already conditioned to do so.
That's something I would be willing to grant, but I wouldn't, actually. Upon second thought, I wouldn't. Because America is not exactly otaku land and doesn't exactly put Japanese anime out there on display. But at the same time, there are parts and different types of media that do. You can find individuals who grow up into anime despite every other member of their family and all of the media they consume being almost non-anime. So I'm not necessarily convinced that this is the case. I'm not necessarily convinced that people have to be incentivized. A lot of people ended up watching the Marvel cinematic movies despite never reading the comics. And I don't think that they necessarily needed to be incentivized to read the comics any more than Americans would need to be incentivized to engage with foreign films. That's why so many people love Ip Man, and there's no Ip Man remake in America.
Take somebody who watches American cartoons.
Okay.
And now introduce them at age 25 to anime for the first time. Is it going to be easier to introduce them to a subbed anime or a dubbed anime?
I don't know. It's like, I don't know. That depends on their experience with the language, which knowing different languages is a whole separate subject. If they are experienced with the Japanese language and culture, then it might be easier for them. But again, we're assuming for some reason that they're not, when we have no good reason to assume that that necessarily has to be the case in most cases.
I'm talking nowadays, not early 2000s when the only good dubbed anime was Cowboy Bebop and late stage Dragon Ball Z. I'm talking about right here, right now, where we have things like Full Metal Alchemist. We do live in a post Cowboy Bebop world. We have Netflix's Evangelion, and yes, I prefer that dub. Don't fucking at me.
I will fucking at you, but at a different time.
The only thing I hate about that dub is what they did to one of Shinji's potential love partners, but I don't want to spoil anything there. Is it easier for me to take this person that's used to watching American cartoons or even just American movies? Is it going to be easier for me to hand them a sub of an anime or a dub?
That depends on whatever you mean by easier. I don't know how you quantify the ease because I don't know what the goal is. Are you saying it would be easier for them to relate? Are you saying it would be easier for them to understand? Are you saying it would be easier for them to comprehend? There are so many factors that go into it besides have you watched anime before. If we were going to go down a route of bringing up alleged anecdotes, I could bring up an anecdote that I introduced my 20-year-old skeleton sister to anime through a abridged anime series, and it very much worked. And she now watches subbed anime. And the ease is irrelevant when the end result is the same. Why does it matter how easy or difficult it is if they eventually either end up liking it or they don't? I don't get the hyperfixation around ease and difficulty of representation because I don't see how that matters except it makes some people feel better and it makes other people feel better, and I want to control how people perceive people around me. I want to control the public perception of the gays and the blacks and the women, so that's another reason why representation, because I have to control the perception of those groups. But I think that's a whole separate thing to talk about.
It's going to be way easier for me to hand them a dub. It's going to be way easier for them to consume it.
Says you. There are some people that didn't know there were dubs of anime. Or at the very least, I see no reason why that's not possible. That some people could be introduced into something on accident and then consume it fairly easily. I'm really genuinely confused. It would be harder for someone who, as completely unfamiliar with anime or Japanese culture whatsoever, it would be harder for me to hand them a dubbed Japanese series it would be harder for me to hand them a subbed Japanese series as opposed to hand them an English dubbed anime series. Therefore, we need to have more positive representation in media of trans people. I'm trying to find the line of reasoning. I'm trying to see where that goes and where the train of thought is supposed to lead me to. But all I get is, yeah, sometimes people have difficulty consuming different types of media. And I don't see the therefore. I don't see what the conclusion is supposed to come after that. Because that seems like a moot, irrelevant point.
When I am confronted with the option of watching something like Passion of the Christ or Pan's Labyrinth, it's harder for me to justify watching either of them because I don't want to read subtitles.
Yes, and that's a personal choice. That's your thing. Stop projecting your things into objective discussions. If you're trying to make a case, stop bringing yourself into it. Exercise is bad. When I do it, it's terrible. My blood sugar goes low. I almost pass out. It's just the worst possible thing. Exercise is terrible because my subjective experience. your subjective experience doesn't matter, at least not to the larger conversation of representation of groups. And I don't know why you keep appealing to your individual experience and bringing that up as if it matters. Let's see. We still good on time. I still got another 40 minutes to get through this 30-minute video.
For me, as a person, I happen to actually consume a lot of media passively while I'm doing other things, while I'm researching, while I'm working on videos.
Okay, good for you. What's that got to do with anything?
So yes, there's an aspect of having it in my language that helps a shit ton.
Does it? Just because it helps you personally. This isn't about you. Do you really think, like, I really want to know, because I'm very confused at this point. Does Suris think that this video is about him? Does he think it's about him and his representation and the representation of his friends and his personal life? Because he is very, very, very much personalizing something that is not about you. If I was having a discussion with a Christian regarding Christianity, I wouldn't go, well, this thing happened to me, because that doesn't matter in the context of whether or not God exists, whether or not Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, whether or not I should become a Christian, any of that, any theological subject. My individual, this is what happened to me, does not matter. And I don't see why you think it matters here.
But continue misunderstanding things.
Misunderstanding what? Your personal subjective experience? Despite the fact that he's not talking to you directly? Okay, I guess I'll continue to keep misunderstanding things because you're going to continue to explain them poorly, or at least in a way that I can't understand.
Unfortunately, this xenophobic mindset infected non-white Americans as well, which leads us into today, where stupid...
Wait, it's xenophobic?
What xenophobic? I think, because the video got paused, I think the point was it's xenophobic to remake videos or remake movies of foreign films, but I don't see how that is automatically xenophobic. I don't get the xenophobic point he's going at. Maybe I just got lost in between his video and Suris's video. I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. I'm trying my best with Suris. Maybe I just got lost, but I missed the xenophobic part. I really did.
Apparently it's xenophobic to want to be represented positively in media.
That's not what he was saying, at least not what I think. Like I said, I could be mistaken, but what he's trying to say is that it's xenophobic to suggest everyone must look like me. Everyone must be like me. And you have to understand from his framework, that is what he's calling xenophobic. Now, his base assumption might be way off, and you can tell him that his base assumption is way off. But if you follow his line of reasoning that I can't relate to anyone who looks like me, that is what he is saying is xenophobic. And you are saying something different than what he is saying. He is not saying that wanting to be represented is xenophobic. He's saying that suggesting that everyone be like me or else I'm not represented is xenophobic. Or something along those lines. Not saying it's good, not saying it's bad, even though it sounds kind of bad from Upper Bend, but I'm saying that I think you're misunderstanding his point.
Okay.
Americans demand films to have garbage dubs or remakes rather than learning how to read the bottom third of the screen like everyone else around the world when we're consuming your piece of media. I talk about this.
That is what he is calling xenophobic. The idea that everything has to be remade and tailored for the Americans or else they just can't consume it. Again, agree, disagree, debate in the comments, do what you do. But I don't think that that's... I think that that is the point that he's making, not what you said was the point he was making.
In another video, what's even more insulting is the think of the children excuse. Representation is necessary so that children who are not white can feel that their existence is validated in this world.
Now, that's a point that I've heard before, and I don't know if that's a point that Suris is going to make, but I'm still going to respond to that point, at least as much as I can as presented. I think that that is bad. I think that that is bad, and I think that that teaches children the negative impression that Suris was saying is not taught or is not meant or is not the argument. That teaches them that, oh, I need to wait until the first black so and so, and then I can be inspired and motivated to do it because them. This causes a dependency. This causes children to be dependent on other people and other people's accomplishments rather than themselves. And I think that that is not good or healthy. I think that it is good to teach everyone that they are capable of doing whatever they can and to make the opportunities as equal as possible, but not to have them be dependent upon looking at how many of them do a thing. When I decided to become a skeptic skeleton, I did not look into YouTube and observe how many skeleton avatars there were and then make a decision based on those skeleton avatars. I didn't look at skeleton representation before deciding anything, and I didn't care, nor should I care. Otherwise, I might be disappointed to know that there is not this overwhelming presence of skeptic skeleton avatars. What I'm saying is, if we're bringing up anecdotes for some strange reason, I didn't need that, and it didn't help me or hurt me in any way, so why should I care? As it pertains to other similar subjects like race, gender, things like that.
You see, this is what happens when you rely on children's parenting job to mainstream entertainment. They're not gonna have their existence validated because you, as a parent, don't validate their existence.
It is not the responsibility of mainstream media to validate the existence of anyone. You might think that that is what mainstream media should be doing, and that's fine, but as it currently stands, that's not the case. Mainstream media doesn't have to do that. And if you think mainstream media ought to do that, you can make that argument and make that point, but I don't think that that's an inherently true point. I think that's just an opinion and an argument that you would then have to back up, not something that's taken for granted.
Okay, no, that's not what that means. You've never talked to anybody who is a minority in the United States.
That's presumptuous. That's incredibly presumptuous. You're judging someone's opinion and saying, hey, you have this opinion, clearly you have no black friends. I feel like that is more presumptuous and prejudiced than anything else. I almost don't care what the person, no, I can't say that. That might be even more presumptuous. To say, based on almost any sentence, you've never talked to minorities, have you, is mind-numbingly just like amazing. I don't even know how you come to that conclusion. Like, I'd love to see you walk me through that process of you hearing him say those words and then going, oh, clearly he's never talked to any minority at all ever. Because if he did, he wouldn't have this opinion.
Who actually has had this before then, right? Okay.
Who actually has had this before then. Had what?
Look, I'm not saying that you're a minority or a majority. I'm talking about people who you've spoken with.
Okay. You have no idea who he has and hasn't spoken with. You're just assuming based on a sentence he said or a series of sentences, which doesn't seem fair to me, unless I can just watch your videos and assume who you have and haven't spoken to based on the words that you say.
If I as an American, as a white American, don't have this problem because I'm largely represented in most of the media that I watch.
Are you? It's like, are you? We get back to the issue of not really having a good or at least productive definition of representation. Does Joey represent you? Does Trump represent you? Does Biden represent you? Do you just look at random people that have your ethnicity and go, yeah, they represent me? Is that how this works? How? I really don't understand. Do you feel more empowered by Joe Biden as a white man because a white man became president? Did you feel more empowered by Trump becoming president? Do you feel more empowered when a white person stars in a superhero movie? Or I do not understand this in any sense. I don't see the benefit. So yeah, I am woefully confused as to what the point is, because you say you don't have this problem, but I'm not sure I understand what the problem even is, or that this problem would need to be corrected. Let's say you, Mr. Miss White Person, moves to Japan and decides to live there. Then, apparently, you would have this problem. Would it be the responsibility of the Japanese media to accommodate you and all other foreigners or minorities in a majority Asian Japanese country? Would it be their responsibility? Sorry, the mute button is a little bit too close. Would it be their responsibility to cater to your feelings? Because so far, that seems to be what we're talking about. We're not talking about anything like money or status or anything else. We're just talking about social treatment. And as of right now, it just seems to boil down to feelings. And I don't see why any media anywhere is under any obligation to cater to anyone's feelings.
I want to go watch Iron Man. Yeah, cool. Tony Stark. He is a white guy with money. Now I don't have money, but it's easier for me to identify with that aspect there. But
why? Genuinely, why? You say that, but why? Do you really just look at Tony Stark, someone who looks nothing like you, and go, I mean, he's white, I think. Did they ever state his race explicitly? I don't know if they ever did in the movies explicitly state what his race was, which would make it worse, because then you would just assume his race by looking at him. Which is a whole other thing, because you could get into people's ancestry and find out that white people aren't actually white depending on how their ancestry goes. But let's just put all that to the side, because that's not relevant. You just looked at Tony Stark and you assumed him to represent you. Do you do this with all white people? Because I don't think that you do. I think you're a bit more selective with how that process goes. Why is the fictional Marvel multiverse under any obligation to present Tony Stark in a fashion that appeases you? You seem to have implied that it did, but why did it? Or should it have? If Tony Stark had been black, let's say, even if that's not comically accurate, let's say they were doing a multiverse thing and Tony Stark was black, how would that have affected your ability to relate to him? That is the point that Appabend is getting at. When you say, hey, this person is easier to relate to, you are implying that if the race changed, it would be harder to relate to them. And that is the point that he is trying to make. I think he's making the point ham-fistedly and not really explaining in good detail, but that is the point. That is the implication. Implying that one thing makes this easier is implying that not having that thing makes it harder. So implying that Tony Stark is a better representation of you implies that, say, War Machine is a less better representation of you just because he looks different. And I don't see why one would necessarily be more or less representative of you based on how they look, or why that matters at all.
if there is, say, a black character on screen who has experiences that don't parallel mine, I might not identify with those as easily.
Okay, so why is the film made to cater to you? And I know you're using yourself as an example, but why is the film made to cater to you? I thought it was telling a story. Let the movie tell its story. But instead of letting the movie tell the story of Wakanda, you're going to go, I can't really relate to the Wakandan prince as well as I can relate to Tony Stark, which matters for some reason.
If I am a child, mind you, this is an argument from a child's perspective.
Okay, children tend not to have good arguments, so I'm already a little scared, but let's go. Let's go.
If I'm a child, the media that I consume is going to have more of an effect on the way I perceive the world than if I'm an adult.
Okay. It's like, okay.
As an adult, I can make these logical leaps without issue. As a child, it's a little bit harder.
Which is why you have adults around you to make the logical leap for you. I might be willing to concede that it's harder for children not to make logical leaps and not to simply go, oh, look, that's how an Asian person acts in a karate movie. All Asians must know karate. I can see why a child would make that mistake, but that's why they have skeptical adults, caregivers, legal guardians, parents to correct them and say, no, let's not assume that everything we see in the movies is true. No, the ocean will not give you a high five just because you're Native American. That's not how that works. And not Native American. You know what I mean.
Especially if, as has so often been the case,
I also know now that I've said that, someone's going to go, see, that's a prime example. You just looked at Moana and assumed she was Native American. No, it's just I'm very ignorant on which cultures are which. I understand that she's not Native American. It's just a thing that I said because I can't remember the actual technical label. But I don't think that's relevant to the point.
if as a child everybody who looks and sounds like me is some kind of villain?
Again, how do you tell this? Everyone that looks and sounds like you? How do you judge this? Which media would you have to consume? I'm trying to put myself in this perspective and understand the point, but it's really, really freaking hard because as a child, you're going to watch Sonic the Hedgehog. As a child, you're going to watch SpongeBob. As a child, you're going to watch anthropomorphic things that don't really have a gender or any of those things behave. So I'm trying to understand how this is relevant to a child's perspective. I'm trying to see how a child of any race is going to watch media in a consistent basis where the media consistently displays them as the villain, and then the child makes the leap that therefore they must be a villain, and the adult does not stop them and just has no parenting or legal guardian skills whatsoever.
Think about what that does to your psyche.
I'm much more interested in what the parent is going to do about the situation. It's not that simple as think about the children, shield them from the bad things. We need to prepare them for the bad things rather than shield them from the bad things. I don't care what that does to some random child's psyche. Not to mention, I have no idea what it does to a child's psyche, and I don't know how we know what that does to a child's psyche. But let's say we did have some method to tell what that particular situation does to a child's psyche. It's still the responsibility of the parent to let the child know that what they're seeing is fiction and not an accurate representation of reality, and not to behave in a manner that is consistent that way. Cute as it might sound, it is not good to let your child think they are a literal Power Ranger. It is not good to let them think that they are literally Spider-Man, because if Spider-Man can do it and Spider-Man's white, I can do it. That's not a good message to let the child believe, which is why you have the skeptical adult to correct their beliefs. The same applies here. Why wouldn't you have an adult that says, no, you just happen to be watching either the media you're watching is incredibly selective and has all minority villains, or that's just not how reality functions. Just because it's in a movie doesn't mean it's in reality. And that's a lesson that you ought to teach children as early as possible so that they can develop the skills as an adult to know better and not do the Tide Pod challenge just because that's all they've ever seen of Tide.
Again, you're a child. It's harder for you to distinguish, fact from fiction earlier on.
Yes, but you should have adults in your life, and it's their job at this stage to do that for you, as well as give you a useful framework to apply elsewhere. This only makes sense if children exist in a vacuum and there's no medium between the children and the media itself. But there is. It's the parents who buy the television. It's the parents who buy the cable. It's the parents who put on the parental lock for the channels that they can and can't watch. It's the legal guardians. There is an entire aspect of the conversation that you are completely not taking into account.
Media is going to have a profound effect on how you conceptualize the world.
Is it going to have more of a profound effect than your legal guardians and your cultural surroundings? because I think that that is a bigger factor than media. Even if media was as powerful as you say it was, and a child is just going to watch Boys in the Hood and make assumptions about black people, it is the responsibility of the legal guardians, the parents, the teachers to go, no, that's fiction, that's not reality. It is the responsibility of the adults to teach the children the difference between fiction and fact and give them a method by which they can determine fiction from fact, which is, I think, the healthiest way to approach this situation. But you don't think that's what we should do. You think we should instead change the media perception, let children mindlessly believe whatever they watch on TV, just change what it is that they mindlessly believe on TV. Don't give your child skeptical, critical thinking skills, just change the message that they get. And to me, that doesn't make you any more of a skeptic than the people you claim are not skeptics, so that you criticize or that you're diametrically opposed. If you're both just two people trying to control the narrative, why should I believe either of you?
What you need to do here is not argue that representation is bad.
Says you. Why is that not what I need to do? And who is necessarily saying that representation in any and all cases is bad? I think he was referring to representation in a forced context, in a context where people are making it the case rather than it happening organically. Correct me if I'm wrong, literally anyone, but I don't think Appabend is making the case that you can't have representation, that having black superheroes or minority politicians or minority representation is automatically a bad thing. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about circumstances under which it is encouraged or forced, as would be implied by his whole complaining about the corporate aspect of it and how things have to be remade in American terms. That seems to imply that he's not talking about what you're talking about.
Because some SJWs didn't get the memo on how representation is supposed to be helpful for them. What you need to do is demonstrate that representation is harmful.
No, I do not. It is not my responsibility to demonstrate that representation is harmful. I have no opinion on it and don't care. It's your responsibility to explain what it is in terms that I can understand, and if you want me to support it, then explain why it's beneficial. And I understand he's probably talking to Appabend in this scenario, and like I said, I'm not here to defend Appabend, but this is only going to work as if I'm having this conversation. So no, the burden of proof is on the one making the claim, and Suris, you should know this. It shouldn't be Appabend's responsibility to prove that you're wrong. It should be your responsibility to prove that you're right. Right? I thought that was how this works, but please do correct me if I'm wrong.
Please. I ask you, demonstrate to me in this video that representation in media is harmful, is a negative thing.
Why is that his responsibility? Not only is that exactly what he's been trying to do, whether you agree that he's done it or not, that is what he's trying to do. That has been what he's done. He was very explicit with his, mountain of salt at the very beginning of the video. So, yeah, he's doing that. You're asking him to do what he is doing. Whether he's doing it effectively or not, or correctly or accurately or in a way that you can understand are all side issues. He's doing it. So what's the problem? Again, if you think he's not effective, say he's not effective. Say how he's not being effective. Say how he's not making sense and how he can communicate a little better, possibly, maybe, rather than just say do the thing.
If I swap out a black character, if I swap out a white character for a black character, explain to me how this action is bad.
If you swap out a white character with a black character, explain to me why you did it, why it's a good thing, why it's necessary or beneficial, and why anyone should care. I think the burden of proof is on you because you are the one making the argument. He is criticizing the argument that you are making, and you're like, prove me wrong. You can't prove I'm wrong, therefore I'm right. Because that seems to be the implication here is prove that I'm wrong or else I'm correct. And if your main point is being correct, then you don't need someone else to prove you wrong. You don't need someone else to prove that something is harmful. If you have enough evidence to demonstrate that it's beneficial, you would present that evidence that it's beneficial and leave it be, because your argument could then stand or fall on its own merit. But apparently you don't have good enough arguments to stand or fall on their own merit. You have to rely on the weakness of other people's arguments. Or at least that's the implication that I'm getting thus far.
And not a character who was previously white and turned to black. I mean, I'm writing a character and I just choose, you know what? No, I want this character to be black instead. I want their lived experiences to be through that lens.
What lens? You are assuming that there is a black lens of lived experience which you have not demonstrated. Why should anyone who is entering this video, who has not heard this subject before and is trying to make up their mind about representation, why should they believe you that there is a black lens and that the race of the character matters? If we were to have this debate, let's say in Dragon Ball Z, and we debated that different characters should have different races, how much would that affect the story of Dragon Ball Z? Would the lived experiences of the characters necessarily change because you change their race? Would Goku's lived experience automatically change if he was black, or a woman, or gay, or anything else? Would that greatly divulge and change the story so much because those are perspectives? Or would they have nothing to do with his ability to fight, which is what he loves to do? I'm trying to understand what the difference is, why it matters, why it's a good thing, why I should agree with you, and you are not giving me good reasons besides it's good.
I can actually tell you that my lived experiences as a white person living in a very poor neighborhood was very different than the black people living in that neighborhood.
Okay, how do you prove that? You can say that all you want, but we come back to the issue of how do you demonstrate that? Why does anyone care about your individual experiences? Any anecdote that you can bring up, if I wasn't so lazy, I could go find a counterexample that counters the exact same point, and we would be here all day. This is why this particular method of argumentation is not particularly, not just not persuasive, but not particularly effective at conveying ideas. Because you can sit here and say, my experience is X, and I can go find a white person who says their experience is Y. And I can go find a white person who says all the Mexicans are taking my job and we need to keep them out. And I could go find a white person that says, I'm a white person, I'm bad, you should put me in slave shackles. And I can go find a bunch of different white people with a bunch of different perspectives, but how does that affect the truth? How does that help me come to know the truth and determine the truth of the situation of whether representation is good or bad, or is something we ought to strive for or not strive for, or just not care? You're not giving me a framework to work with. You are just saying things with no framework for me to analyze whether they're good, bad, right, wrong, etc., etc.
One aspect of that is that I was the one white person on my street. There
Okay, so
weren't other white families where I grew up.
So
It was all black families.
So
Their lived experiences and mine are going to be radically different.
why? You live right next to each other and have the exact same economic status and presumably go to the same school. Why? Why would their lived experiences necessarily be different than yours? The only thing you've detailed that's different is your skin color. That's it. You have not stated any other functional difference between your lives other than you lived on the same block, you were white, they were black. Therefore, your experiences necessarily must be different because... Oh, I guess we're just not gonna we're not gonna defend the things we say. We're not gonna explain them. We're just gonna say something, and people are gonna believe me, and then I'm gonna carry on. Again, if this video was actually made as a response to Appabend, do you really think that any of this is going to be effective at getting him to understand your perspective better? Again, I can't really speak for agreement or disagreement, but getting him to understand the point that you are claiming he is missing, is this really effective? Because I'm a neutral party and I still don't understand the point that you're getting at. You literally were like, I was the only black person, I was the only white person on my block, everybody else was black, and because we have different skin colors, our experience is necessarily going to be different. I'm not going to explain why. I'm not going to defend that and offer proof or evidence. I'm just going to say it and you're going to believe me. I guess.
You chose to rely on mainstream entertainment to parent your children about the world rather than doing your goddamn job as a parent.
This is the point that I was talking about earlier about the whole, it is the responsibility of the adults in the child's life to do the skepticism for them because they're too young to do the skepticism themselves. It is the responsibility of the parents, legal guardians, whomever, to exercise skepticism and give the child a skeptical framework that they can apply later up in life. The child is not just on their own helpless to the media, or at least they ought not be if they have a legal guardian.
Irresponsible parents who chose to submit themselves into the horny and spawning babies into the world when they themselves are not prepared for that kind of responsibility.
Okay, we've gone off the deep end and gone off into a tangent about having kids when you don't have the ability to support them, which is not what this conversation is about. This is the sort of thing that, things like this are why I have to clarify that I'm not defending Appabend, because he goes off the deep end like this. I take charitable interpretations of the things that he says, but that doesn't mean I agree with the things that he says. Like that. I have no idea what that had to do with the argument or anything in general. It just came out of left field.
I'm going to say it right now. No parent is prepared for the responsibility of being a parent. None.
Okay, so saith the great Suris, so it shall be. If you say so, I must believe you. Again, how can you call yourself a skeptic when you just say some shit, don't defend it, don't explain it, you just say it, and then we just believe you? No parent is ever ready. No parent is ever prepared. They just aren't. Doesn't matter if they've taken classes, doesn't matter if they've sought guidance, doesn't matter if they've made sure they're financially responsible, doesn't matter if they've made sure they have time to raise the child, doesn't matter if they've taken any precautionary measures whatsoever, they're never ready. Under no circumstances at all, ever. Because
it is not until the moment where you are a parent, where you actually are put in the shoes of someone who is having to deal with what a parent deals with.
What? Okay, so let me see if I understand this. Basically, no one is ever ready to be a parent because you'll never be ready to be a parent until you are a parent. And until you are a parent, you cannot understand what it's like to be a parent, so you can't be ready to be a parent. I don't see what those two things have to do with each other. Having the experience of having been a parent and being ready to be a parent aren't the same thing. Perhaps that's the same thing to you. Maybe that's what you think it is, that unless you've already had a child, you can never be ready for a child, because to be ready for a child is to already have had a child. I don't know why that's a definition you would go with, but that doesn't seem to be a definition that has any benefit. All you've said is you're not ready to have a child because you've never been a parent before. And if we translate that, when you say you're not ready, you're just saying you haven't had a child before, so you haven't had a child before, because that's what readiness is. So you're not ready because you're not ready. You haven't had a child before because you haven't had a child before. You're not ready because you haven't had a child before. And it's until you have a child that you become ready. Now, all of that is not substantiated or demonstrated or proven. I'm just supposed to take Suris's word for it, despite any and all contradictory views that might exist on the face of the planet Earth. I just have to accept what he says, that no one on the face of planet Earth, regardless of culture, financial experience, preparation, any of that, they are all unprepared to be parents up until the point at which they are actually parents. So saith Suris.
You can make all this fuss about you need to be prepared, you need to be prepared. To an extent, it's true.
What? You just complained about the idea by calling it fuss and then legitimized it. So you acknowledge that it's true, and then you also are like, but it's fuss. I'm confused.
But at the end of the day, only when you are a parent will you be able to actually have that type of lived experience.
Okay, but whether or not you've had that lived experience doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you are ready for that lived experience. You might not necessarily have the lived experience of a job you're applying for, but the point of the training is to get you ready. You still haven't had the lived experience. All you've done is the training. You have not officially started. That doesn't mean you're unprepared. That doesn't mean you're not ready. I don't see this conflation between readiness and having had the lived experience. I don't see why those two things are one and the same to Suris.
This is what leads to the destruction of our civilization. Parents who are not ready.
What? Wait, what? What? I got lost. What leads to the destruction of our civilization? Because I feel like we made a hard left turn. Let me go back for a second.
This is what leads to the destruction of our civilization. Parents who are not ready to be parents, spawning children who are never given any sorts of proper care into this godforsaken world because they're too horny and too busy to reach out for any sorts of protection.
This seems like a complete and utter side tangent that has nothing to do with the conversation about representation. I guess he got distracted when we started talking about Think About the Children, and then just went off on a tangent about parents needing to be ready to have kids or whatever. I'm not here for it. It's not the point of my being here. It's not the topic that I wanted to address. So I'm just going to ignore it and any subtopic around it and fish around to see if there's anything else relevant to what I actually want to talk about.
Wait. The parents are too busy and horny to look out for protection? Okay, so according to the chat, you're from Indonesia, so maybe you don't understand what happens at least here in the United States. Here in the U.S., we have a large percentage of places that teach abstinence-only education, a wholly unrealistic expectation for many people. What is a great use of protection? There were people was not needed during oral sex. Some of these were beliefs that I had at that time, because I was in this magical scenario where I didn't even get a sexual education. Because that sex ed class was supposed to happen, it was in Pensacola Christian Academy. I didn't move into the public sector until 6th. So I magically skipped the sex ed class. I never even got to have it. Between the rubber of the two condoms, which causes them both to rupture. Putting on two condoms does not... Wait, do people in chat not know that? Double layering your condoms does not double your protection. It actually makes it worse because they burst. Because you're rubbing rubber on rubber. What? Through this really, really dumb sexual education. QED, I guess.
It's basically the entire plot of Idiocracy. As an Indonesian myself, I personally don't feel like I've been represented, and I don't need to be, because I have bigger issues to deal with. So
Okay. This is a relevant point to the representation thing. I'm skipping over all the other nonsense because that's not what I'm here for. So, he doesn't feel like he needs to be represented better. Let's say we have another Indonesian that says they do feel they need to be represented better. Who do we believe and why? How do we tell whether or not we should change the way they're represented in whichever media we're discussing, and whose interpretation of accurate or poor or good or bad representation are we going to go with? because as of right now, I don't see any reason to believe any of it.
Such
Okay, cool. That's great for you. Does everybody necessarily have your lived experiences?
According to you, they do, because they're Indonesian. You assumed all the black people had the same lived experiences and probably relate to Will Smith from the Fresh Prince of Bel Air. So you don't get to do this dance that you're doing where you don't get to lump people's experience together, where you complain about someone else lumping people's experiences together based on race, and then you also go on to do the same thing. You need to pick a side. You're either going to treat everyone as individuals or you're going to treat them as their minority groups. You don't get to do a little bit of both.
No. And because they don't, you arguing anecdotally from the position of an individual.
Just like you were doing earlier? Hello? Hello? Do you watch these before they air? Do you play them back? Do you actually like pay attention to the things you say in a video and then check to see, like, do you even edit, bro? Do you even edit? Because I don't think you do.
Doesn't work here.
So I'm trying to understand how you are shitting on him for giving an anecdote or an anecdotal experience when you were bitching about your anecdotal experience with Tony Stark and how you identified gay people and you living on a street with all black people and all those other anecdotes you bitched about. When you bring up anecdotes, it's good and demonstrates some point that different people of different races necessarily have different experiences. And when he does it, it's bad because you don't speak for all Indonesians. Seriously, what is going on?
But it's an economic crisis. It can really help by supporting me through the links down below. When I notice the gamelan or the angklung in Anthem of the Heart, for example, or when I see the names of the locations and buildings with Malay or Indonesian names in Just Cause 2, I don't feel empowered at all. I look at that and I thought, wow, that's cool, and I move on with my life.
Okay, cool. Again, that works for you, not everyone.
Yes, and what you're suggesting with representation is functionally indistinct from that. You wanting better representation of trans people, gay people, black people, white people, Asian people, that is functionally the same thing as him. If you got the correct or not poor representation that you wanted in media, you would be in his position, and that would be good for you. The point that I'm making is that you're complaining about him when you are seeking functionally the same goal. And I say functionally, not literally. You don't literally want the same goal that he wants. You don't literally not care about representation like he does. But if you got the representation you wanted, not just for you, but for everybody, you would be in his shoes and you would say everything's fine, everything's good. I think everyone's representation is good. And if I should not care about his opinion about representation, then why should I care about yours? If you're going to make the case that good for you, that's good for you, but what about everyone else? Then I'm going to do the same thing to you when you complain. That's bad for you, but what about everyone else? Are we going to assume that it's bad for everyone because it's bad for you and the black people whose street you lived on? Or are we going to demonstrate that it's bad with something other than anecdotes and saying words? Because that is functionally everything that's happened in this video. Not a citation, not a study, not a survey, not a to be brought up.
What's going on?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. What's going on? Your waifu's glitching out. Your waifu's glitching out. Yes, StreamYard. I know. I'm using you right now. Where's the skip? There you are. The skip button. Our Lord and Savior. So, awkward silence is awkward. Awkward silence is really awkward. Really, really awkward. Yep, skipping.
Also, yeah, apparently there is the
Oh, uh,
Also, yeah, apparently there is the problem where if you just move on from this, then why are you getting mad about it?
I don't go out and dedicate.
it's like I said, he wants his perception to be accurate in a certain sense. He doesn't care about representation. He sees it, doesn't care, and moves on with his day. You see it, and you have a problem with it. And for some reason, I, being a neutral party, am supposed to care about you having a problem with it instead of him not having a problem with it. I'm supposed to care that you think other people aren't represented well rather than he thinks he is represented well. And I don't see any reason why I should believe or listen to either of you or take either of you seriously, especially when neither of you present actual evidence for any of the things you say. You just say things and then go on strange tangents about parenthood.
Dedicate my life to beg for the entertainment industry senpai to notice me because I am very secure in my existence, even if YouTube and Google aren't. But
Is that not a fair statement to say? Because I would think that's something to bring up. A certain level of personal responsibility can be a good thing. And if someone has that level of personal responsibility, they won't care whether or not the media acknowledges their existence. They won't need it because they will have acknowledged their own existence. It's the statement of you have to learn to love yourself before you can love anyone else. If you're not secure in yourself and you need the media to validate your existence, that is a bad dependent relationship rather than an independent one that is healthy and you can maintain your own happiness and also get happiness from the media, as opposed to the media being your main source of validation.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go and say this right now.
Okay?
You, personally, as a single individual, are secure in your existence.
Okay. And before you go on, should this not be the attitude we encourage other people to have? Should we not also encourage everyone to be fine with or good with or happy with their existence and validated? Should we not encourage the attitude that Appabend has towards his ethnicity, race, culture, whatever? Should we not encourage that attitude to just be applied to everybody, to just not give a shit and not care, and to have your validation come from you rather than media? Or should we enable people and make them dependent upon media's representation of them? I know which I think would cause less harm, and if you were interested in minimizing harm, you wouldn't encourage people to remain susceptible to the things that are hurting them. You would try to give them the tools and equip themselves with the ability to defend against it. You would not complain about viruses being viruses. You would give people medicine so that they could fight off the virus. You wouldn't say, well, this virus is targeting a particular ethnic demographic, and that's not really good or fair, because then people might grow up thinking that this demographic has this disease more often. No, you would just be trying to help people cope with the disease so that they could get to that point. If where Appabend is a good place to be, why are we not just encouraging people to follow Appabend's route to get to the place that he got? That is my question. If you are really going to validate Appabend's current position as that's good for you and that's fine and that's wonderful and that's dandy, why isn't that good, fine, wonderful, and dandy for everybody?
That's wonderful. Not everybody is.
But shouldn't everybody be? And that is the question. Should everyone be like Appabend? I would argue in this regard that yes, they should, because Appabend has a healthy relationship with media where he is not dependent on it for validation. He can live his life with or without it, and he is not harmed nor enhanced by it. His value comes from himself, a source that he can control, rather than the media, a source that he can't control. That is healthier, to have your validation come from a source you can control than to have it come from a source you can't. Why is that not what we're teaching everyone? That seems to me to be the benefit of Apaben's perspective and the benefit of his attitude. And I don't understand why you don't think that that is what everyone should think.
Not everybody is secure in their existence.
But shouldn't they be? And shouldn't they be secure in their existence in such a ways as they are not crippled or enhanced by media? I think we would both agree that people's existence, or people ought to feel validated in their existence. I'm arguing that the source of that validation should be yourself, and that you shouldn't give a shit about the media. You seem to be arguing that the media is what matters more, and we should control it. And I don't know why you would choose that route. I don't know why you wouldn't give someone the tools to empower themselves rather than enable them into thinking that they need to be empowered by something external outside of their control.
It doesn't make them weaker, it just makes them different.
It does make them different, but it makes them more likely to be hurt and makes them more susceptible to harm. They are more likely to get their feelings hurt. They are more likely to feel less validated. They are more likely to be susceptible to the things that you deem to be problematic in media representation. Whereas if they had Apaben's attitude, they wouldn't give a shit. And they would be damn near bulletproof to however accurately or inaccurately the media represents them. So, why aren't we going with Apaben's attitude here? His seems to be the demonstrably healthy one that is independent and has oneself as the source of validation, whereas you seem to be implying that the source of validation is and or should be other things. And I don't see why you're not just saying, fuck the media and how they choose to portray you. You determine your worth, you determine your value, you determine your validation, and be happy with that. Why isn't that the message that we're spreading?
Then again, with you shrieking about this as loud as you are, I'm curious as to how secure you actually feel.
You really want to go down that route? Do you really want to? Because I don't think that you do. With your anecdotes and your Tony Stark and your black people on the street, I really don't think you want to go down the attitude of shrieking. But, okay.
That's the thing, isn't it? I'm not some narcissistic blogger seeking some vapid validation in the world. I am just some Indonesian guy making YouTube videos on the internet. And
Wait, hold on. So, wait. The blogger is narcissistic, but you as the YouTuber, a position that is occupied primarily by narcissists.
Okay, I believe you. Are you going to substantiate that? Are you going to demonstrate that YouTubers are primarily narcissists? Are you going to demonstrate any connection, correlation, anything at all? Or is this another thing we're going to throw in the pile of things that Suris says and doesn't prove? Because that's where we're getting. The longer this video goes on, the higher that stack of just unsubstantiated claims gets.
I should know. Hi.
Again, that sounds like projection. Taken charitably, that's a joke. And not taken charitably, that's projection, anecdotal projection once again.
You get the free pass. Your opinion is fine, but the blogger's opinion is not.
It's not a matter of whose opinion is fine. It's a matter of which opinion he agrees with, or the one that he validates. The point is not to say, I'm not narcissistic because I have this particular opinion, and you are narcissistic because you have this particular opinion. It's, I'm not narcissistic because I don't give a shit. Whereas you care so much about yourself that you want society's media to appease you. Because at the end of the day, and Suris hasn't demonstrated it otherwise, or I missed it, this is about that appeasement. Whether it's to a group or to an individual, and regardless of the reasons, it's about appeasing individuals or groups. And what he's saying is, I don't need to be appeased by the media, so I'm not narcissistic. You do need to be appeased by the media, and in fact, you demand that the media appease you. That does make you narcissistic because it's about you and what you think is best for you, your community, your people, your minority, other minorities that agree with you, so on and so forth. That is the point he is making. Agree with it, disagree with it, what have you. But be known that's the actual point that he's making. And I'm so sorry I missed the deconverted man. I'm sorry he missed that, but we'll catch up later. I really want to get through this and just be done with it because it's getting kind of late. So let's just hurry up and finish the video.
Okay, sure thing.
And speaking as an Indonesian, I would appreciate if you let me.
I'm also going to stop Apabend right here because that's also a thing that I don't like. Being Indonesian does not make your arguments any better or worse. So speaking as an Indonesian or speaking as a white man, Suris, living on a street full of black people, speaking as whatever does not make you any more likely to be right or wrong and has nothing to do with the strength or quality of your arguments. So that right there automatically is worthy of dismissal. At least that in and of itself, the whole speaking as a such and such.
Speak for myself.
Nobody said they had to speak for you. Well, I say nobody. I'm lying.
Well, Suris just admitted that he lied. That definitely is points in the in the believability category. But I'm being a little bit facetious. See what I did there?
There are some people who try to white knight and try to speak on, like, as authorities for minority groups.
And you are absolutely not one of those individuals. Correct?
And yeah, you should be allowed to speak for yourself. But guess what? You can't. You're doing it right now.
Yes, he is. Congratulations. You see the thing, and you say the thing is the thing.
You're doing a great job speaking for yourself right now. But here's the thing.
Okay.
What you're doing here is not functionally speaking for yourself.
Okay, so you're speaking for yourself, but you're not speaking for yourself. I'm going to hear this out, but immediately we have a problem because you're speaking for yourself and you're doing a great job, but you're not actually speaking for yourself.
What you're doing here is speaking on behalf of Indonesians.
Is he? When did he say he was speaking on behalf of Indonesians?
You see, when you take up the stance that you're doing, you're taking up the stance of speaking for minority groups. You are arguing for minority groups.
When did he say that's what he was doing? And what did he say implied that that is what he was doing at all, ever? How did you reach this conclusion? Can someone help me? I don't know. Let me check the chat. Deconverted man, are you still here? Can you help me? I'm lost. I'm really lost. I'm super, super lost.
You are arguing that they do not need representation because you, as an individual, perceive yourself a very particular way.
No. That is not, as I understand it, the argument to be. The argument is not, I'm perfectly fine with the situation, therefore everyone else should be fine too. The argument is, I derive my individual validation, positive energy, proof of existence, all that stuff. I derive my value from myself. And I encourage other people to do that as well because that is healthy to me. And I think it's bad to cause other people to become dependent upon media as their primary source of engagement or what have you. So the point in this is not, I'm okay, therefore everybody should be okay. The point is, I have found a way to validate my existence in a way that isn't dependent on anyone or anything outside of my control, and I encourage you to do the same. That is a functionally different message than, I'm fine, so everybody's got to be fine. I, Indonesian man, fine. All Indonesians got to be fine. All people of color got to be fine. All minorities got to be fine. He is trying to give you an alternative and a healthy, helpful framework by using himself as an example, he is trying to give you a healthy alternative framework to I need to be validated through the media, and I need to use the media to control other people to make them not think bad things about me because people are stupid. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, that is the point that he is making, not the point that you said he is making, as far as I can tell.
But here's the thing. When you make this argument, I would like to speak for myself, and then you proceed to speak on behalf of others afterwards.
Again, you haven't explained when and where he did that. You just are saying that's what he did, but at no point did he say, I'm speaking on behalf of other people. He specifically said, in the clip that you showed, I am speaking for myself. And you acknowledge that he is speaking for himself. And then you proceed to tell him that he is not speaking for himself. And you then provide no evidence to substantiate this position. You just follow that train of thought, as if we're willing to just grant that. Again, Suris, where's your skepticism? Because I'm not seeing it here.
You don't really have a very valid argument anymore. Your argument now...
Oh, good. Suris is going to tell someone what their argument is, rather than argue against the argument they actually presented. That's not what a straw man is at all.
has completely fallen by the wayside, because you are not operating within the confines of your argument at this point.
Says you. And I don't mean that to be derivative or snide, but at this point, says you. We have reached a point in this discussion where people are just saying things and not substantiating the things that they say. And I'm supposed to just believe what Suris is saying about Apaben despite watching the same video and coming to a drastically different conclusion because...
The lack of self-awareness is very, very strange.
Yes, it is. But I don't think it is for the reasons that you think it is.
Verge published an article talking about how Disney's latest film, Raya and the Last Dragon, makes the writer feel like she's finally being noticed by Hollywood senpai.
No, that's not. It's not about being noticed by Hollywood. It's about being seen culturally.
What's the difference? What is the difference between being noticed by Hollywood and being seen culturally? If you're going to say that they're different, you have to explain how.
It's about you as an individual having a place in the cultural zeitgeist.
As an individual, having a place in the cultural zeitgeist. And that's not narcissistic at all, to want your individuality to be a part of the cultural zeitgeist. The cultural zeitgeist must include you. Anyway, as far as Deconverted Man, so as much as I would like to bring you in on this, I know the two of us will never get this actually done. So I want to reach the end of the video. If you'd like to have a discussion after I finish the video, I'd be more than welcome to continue because I've already gone past my 2-hour mark, so who cares at this point? But I really want to make sure I finish the video first, and then you are more than welcome to join in afterwards. Now, back to Suris.
It's not about Hollywood noticing you.
Which is different how? Just in case we got confused, he's supposed to be clarifying a distinction between two things, but it doesn't seem like that's what he's doing other than just saying that they're different.
That's a terrible reduction of that argument.
Because?
It's a straw man.
Because?
Which seems to be the only thing you're capable of here.
Okay, you're not going to explain why it's a straw man. You're just going to say that it is and move on. Your arguments are obviously better.
And if you cringe by my anime way of describing it, good, because that's how cringy this entire thing is. It's a bunch of narcissistic, entitled brats who want to be noticed by Hollywood senpai, but I don't want to be noticed by Hollywood because Hollywood is a cesspool of the most garbage individuals on planet Earth who's only famous because they know how to act. But
again, I'm not going to defend Apaben's statements about Hollywood because I don't really care and that's not relevant to why I'm here. But the attitude of not caring, I think, is a healthy and productive goal. Regardless of whether or not his reasons seem to be a bit the goal of I don't care about Hollywood validation seems to be a ostensibly healthier goal that one can control and then derive their own validation from themselves, instead of Hollywood must validate my existence and I cannot validate my own existence without Hollywood. And if this is not a point Cirrus disagrees with, if he thinks that you can validate your existence without Hollywood, why wouldn't you promote that instead of having your existence validation be dependent on Hollywood?
Wait, so because they know how to wait. So let me get this straight. Bloggers are narcissists. Hollywood people are assholes because they know how to act.
No. When did he say that they were assholes because they know how to act? Did we watch the same clip? As far as the bloggers thing, it was about what the bloggers were saying, not the fact that they were bloggers. But I don't know. I'm genuinely concerned that Cirrus might not have a good understanding of spoken English. And again, that probably sounds harsh and might get me in trouble, but genuinely, honestly, I don't know how else to charitably interpret this.
But individual YouTubers, they're fine.
Why wouldn't they be?
Do you listen to yourself
Apparently you don't.
when you make content?
I don't think you do, because if you did, you wouldn't have bitched at him for using an anecdote after you used 3.
I'm just curious. How self-aware are you? Now I'm speaking.
I swear I could take this clip out and put it in a video and use it against Cirrus in this very same video. It's eerily scary how much this applies to himself.
As a dude who is unironically speaking through a gender-bent Neko version of a cartoon avatar that he used to speak through 3 years ago on the internet. I wholly understand that there is a lot of unironic cringe associated with what I do and how I act. I'm also a leftist operating as a VTuber.
Okay. I don't know what a VTuber is, but okay.
An appropriation of Japanese idol culture with
Appropriation. Nope, not gonna go there. Not gonna do it. You can't make me. Nope, that's not what this video is about. We're not gonna go there.
which is incredibly toxically capitalist. When I'm anti-capitalist, I wholly understand.
None of that has anything to do with the main subject of what we're discussing, and we have gone way off the rails here. I would hope that you would make a more focused argument and stay on point, but for some strange reason, you've gone off the deep end again to talk about something that's not relevant, just like he did when he went on about parents not being able to raise their children.
That there are layers of cringe in regards to what I do on the internet.
Who cares? Just get on with it.
But I feel as though you have a noted lack of self-awareness.
So, who cares? The argument isn't about the cringe. It's about the argument.
Completely. Also, Hollywood is more than just actors. It's also artists. It's also producers. It is also directors. It is...
None of that is relevant. Okay, you know what? You two argue about that. I'm skipping to a relevant point because I don't care.
that you can generalize all of your people by the anecdote of you.
Whoa, wait, what?
Generalization fallacy is also directors. It is also, and I could go on and on and on, with the different people who work within Hollywood.
Yeah, whatever.
You can keep on engaging in hasty generalization fallacies, and then argue that...
Hasty generalization fallacies. Cirrus, who said that black people... He didn't clarify social standing, he didn't clarify economic status, he clarified nothing. Just black people probably share some part of Will Smith's experience in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He didn't explain why, so I'm left to assume it's because they're black. But no, he doesn't make hasty generalizations. A hasty generalization would be that people get their perceptions of other minority groups and people from the media. and does not expand on or defend or elaborate or cite or anything as opposed to just saying that's how people function. He will then go on to cite himself as someone who needed to use media to identify gay people and therefore take that and make a generalization of Americans, Western culture, people in general, and then accuse someone else of making hasty generalizations. You see, I actually demonstrate my points. I've at least addressed or attempted to address what specifically I thought you did fits in the hasty generalization category, which was your many, many anecdotes, as well as your projection of your experience, whether it be living on a street full of black people or some other thing, and then projecting that onto other people, saying that because you're white, you don't have a problem with representation, which is exactly the same thing that he said when he said, as an Indonesian man, I don't care about representation. But you want to call someone else self-aware. You want to call someone else, making hasty generalizations when black people probably relate to the experience of Will Smith on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Probably.
You could generalize all of your people by the anecdote of you.
Which he did not do because he specifically said he was speaking for himself. But okay, go on.
But at the end of the day, it just makes me cringe at what I feel like I'm going to get from the rest of your content. And according to the chat, apparently you were part of Comicsgate and stuff. Oh, Jesus.
I'm not going to dignify that with a response.
Oh, jeez.
But let's read the article anyway. The writer begins by describing how Raya and the Last Dragon is so much more than the latest Disney flick. No, it's not, writer. It's exactly just that. Another freaking Disney flick.
That's an opinion, and I don't really care about your opinions on movies, so let's keep going.
In all honesty, I haven't seen the film. I'll probably talk about it separately when I got the chance to see it with my girlfriend, but
I don't think you... Okay, because I think I know what Suris is going to go for, but I'm putting that aside. That is a hasty generalization, because it's just another Disney flick that you haven't seen before, so you have no grounds to grade it in any way. It's just another Disney flick. It's not more than another Disney flick. It is another Disney flick, and I'll demonstrate it to you after I actually watch the movie.
So wait, hold on. It's only just the latest Disney flick. It's not more than that. But you haven't seen it?
Yes, I know.
Right now. You sound like somebody who hadn't watched Zack Snyder's Justice League and then argued that it's going to be just as shitty as Joss Whedon's Justice League without having watched it.
Okay.
I'm just going to go ahead and say right now, Zack Snyder's Justice League was awesome as shit.
Okay, can we move on?
It's not exactly something I've wasted Disney Plus subscription for, or even $5 in the theaters that just recently opened, and that...
Okay, care to explain why not? Although I prefer you didn't. I really want to just be done with the video. I'm just trying to watch it for the sake of context, but I'm pretty much tapped out at this point.
That's precisely why I joined in with a Straw Hat Cruise for it, and even then, I'd rather you kind...
Oh my god. You're so virtuous for pirating it. You're individual. Look. Your individual aptitude for piracy does not suddenly make for a good argument, my friend.
Neither does yours, but that hasn't stopped you, so...
This film and watch something better like the Ong Bak trilogy. The writer says that thanks to her growing in America, she hardly ever saw Asians in movies or television, and...
What? Isn't one of the popular... So, I know this is another person within another person within another person's response, because we're just in a rabbit hole of responses, but growing up in America, they hardly saw Asian movies or television. That sounds like a personal problem that they should get over, and they shouldn't use their anecdotal experience to try to demonstrate a larger societal problem.
And if she did, they were rarely brown and Southeast Asian like her.
Okay, so...
What I absolutely despise about this argument is that the writer insinuates from this paragraph that she can't find enjoyment out of a film because the characters don't have the same physical characteristics as the writer.
She didn't really say that, and I don't think there's enough information here for you to extrapolate that. That's not what she said.
Alright, I want you guys to read this sentence right here. I want you to see where in this sentence, or even track down the article, see where in that article this argument was made. I want you to find where specifically they said, I did not enjoy any of those films because a brown Asian person was not in them.
While we're on that subject, Suris, I want you to go through his video and find specifically the part where he said he was speaking on behalf of Indonesians or minorities. If we're in the business of doing that, I think we should start there.
Go ahead. I'll wait. I'll pause the video. Find it.
Will you actually do what you're suggesting, or are you suggesting other people do something that you haven't actually done? Because you didn't point out any section of this where he actually said, I am speaking on behalf of other individuals. You deliberately played a part where he said he was speaking on behalf of himself and then just ignored that. So you are in no position to be nitpicky right now.
And now that you're back, let me know in the comment section.
If it's really that necessary for you to see yourself represented on a film, you can just scour through the internet for the latest Indonesian or Thailand films, because that's where they got most of the brown Asians at. I recommend the Raid duology myself. Also Headshot, The Night Comes For Us, Triple Threat, Dylan 19... Okay, not that one. But apparently we have to beg for the Disney Corporation to make sure that your pathetic existence is validated.
It's not...
Pathetic existence. Okay, wow. This guy is definitely in it for the argument.
about... Oh my god. Your pathetic existence is validated. Okay, so can I go ahead and point out that her argument isn't that... If we were to accept that her argument was that she couldn't get enjoyment out of these films, okay? That's not what's being said in the article. But let's pretend for a minute that it is. If that is what's being said, the argument does not then follow find films from your own region or whatever. You might have grown up in America and not spoken languages from any of those films. But you still grew up in America. Your culture is American. You grew up here.
So?
Representation for yourself in this culture would still be useful and neat.
Useful how? Personally, neat is not exactly the best argument. I can argue that a sandwich is neat. So what? We're talking about larger societal representation and why certain minority groups should be presented differently or better or less or more or different things like that. We're having a much larger conversation, yet for some reason your primary consideration is whether or not it's neat and useful. And I have to wonder, to what end? Useful for what purpose? Why should I necessarily support something? Something being useful, I guess, is good, but it depends on what it's being used for, and right now, I can't determine that it's being used for anything other than feeling better.
And again, you haven't demonstrated that it's harmful. You just argue that people are narcissists.
Yeah, and you've done the exact same thing. You argued that YouTubers were narcissists without actually demonstrating that point, and you shifted the burden of proof to him. It's his responsibility to prove that it's harmful instead of your responsibility to prove that it's neat or beneficial.
While operating as one.
Cool, by talking about how the film is so Southeast Asian. The main character is voiced by Kelly Marie Tran, who is Vietnamese American. The screenplay was written by writers who both trace their roots back to Southeast Asia. So what you're saying is this film that has Southeast Asian influences is produced by Asian Americans rather than actual Southeast Asians. That explains why I feel there's something off with it, but what do I know as a native Southeast Asian? Clearly I need to bow...
Again, native Southeast Asian, appealing to your own race and ethnicity, that doesn't make your arguments any better or worse. It's just a random side tangent. You don't see me appealing to my skeptical bones every 5 seconds.
The superiority of Asian Americans that are apparently more cultured than me.
Nobody said that. Nobody said that. And moreover, there could be other people on those teams that do trace their roots directly to literally like places that you live. Also, as a fantasy series, as a fantasy movie, which I'm assuming it is, there could also be a mixture of cultural influences creating the environment in that movie.
Okay, this is getting too long, and I think I've addressed all the points that I actually want to address. So, as far as that's concerned, I'm done. Um, Deconverted man, if you're still here, I will bring you in so that you can join. Just give me one moment. Oh, also, hi, Purple Rhymes with Orange. It's always great to see you. You are the legend. You are the rock that holds my subscriptions together. So, yes, welcome, welcome, welcome. So, yeah, anyone who's watching this after the fact, this is just an awkward silence of me trying to invite someone to the stream. So, you could probably skip over this later, whoever watches this later. Because I do know people tend to watch my streams after the fact. So, yeah, or at least parts of them. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-da-do. Ba-da-da-da-do-do-do-do. There we go. Let me see. Let me find the Lobster Man. All right, and I have hit send. Sending. Message sent. All right, Deconverted Man, you should get the message to join the party soon. I've said pretty much all I have to say, but yeah. No, that's perfectly fine. I understand. Purple Rhymes with Orange. I understand it is quite late. That's why I try to set these up and have them wrap up at a very quick pace. But as we see, that tends not to work out so well because we're approaching the 3 hour mark. But I appreciate you stopping by and listening for the little bit that you could. If at any point you would actually want to give some counter arguments or counterpoints or anything like that, you can find me on Twitter, DM me on Twitter, um, and I will definitely reach out to you. So yes, either that or let me know which works better for you. I could give you my email as well. I would be very interested to hear what you have to say. Purple Rhymes with Orange. So whichever works for you. Hey, here's the
No.
man.
Alright. Skeptic man here. Yeah.
So, welcome, friend. Welcome to the video about cultural and racial and gender representation.
No, I'm not.
I
I'm not going to talk about any of that. Good luck with all that.
I already said everything I pretty much had to say about that. Um, just to wrap up on that point, I don't see the benefits. I think we should be teaching people to have their validation come from inside rather than come from media. And I think whether this is what Suris intends to do or not, what Suris is in fact doing is teaching people to seek validation from media and use media to control the people around you to make them like you better. If in fact his premise of, oh well, people get their base biases and the prejudices and assumptions, they get all that stuff from media because Cyrus admitted himself, oh, I got my perception of how I determined someone was gay, I got that from media, therefore everyone does the same thing that I do, therefore we need to control media to stop people like me who are too stupid and control us to make us like the gay people. I'm more of a fan of freedom than I am of making people like people. So
Well,
I
I
have a
didn't.
problem with that. Yo, go
I have a
ahead.
bit of echo here. I don't know. That's on
So,
your side.
oh, sorry if
Can you?
that's on my end, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's my point. My point is, I don't think representation is good. I don't think it's the downfall of the world or evil or any of that either. I just think it's better to focus on teaching individuals to seek validation internally rather than externally. I am now going to put my Twitter in the chat for Purple Rhymes with Orange. Deconverted Man, you have the floor.
Oh, okay. Hi, how's it going? I'm Deconverted Man, but I named myself Skeptic Man because I'm a skeptic skeleton, and I love Skeptic Skeleton. He's the best skeptic skeleton I know. And you should subscribe if you're not, and like and comment and bell the icon and do all that stuff. I didn't watch the video, so I came in, rather late. So I can't comment on the video that's on the screen. But I guess I can comment to in general topic that we seem to be discussing is of representation, whatever that is kind of odd. I don't know if I want to what do I want to call it, phenomenon or whatever you want to say it is. I remember way back when I first found Sailor Moon on TV. Flipping through the channels like that, nothing's on, naked girl, nothing's on. Wait, what? It's like it's Sailor Moon in the middle of transformation sequence, and it's like, I don't know what this is, but I'm watching this. And of course you find out, the English version was all I knew, and it got me into the Japanese version and all that. Flash forward to sometime later where I knew about the Japanese stuff, hadn't seen too much of it yet because it's really hard to get at the time. But I was aware enough about who the characters were, and there's two characters, Uranus and Neptune, Sailor Uranus, Sailor Neptune, who are in a relationship, clear relationship in the Japanese version, and nothing big, no big deal is made of it. This is just who they are and what they do, and it's not a big deal. Usagi kind of like is a bit like confused or surprised or maybe a little bit taken aback by it. It's not really clear because that doesn't really translate well in the subtitles or anything. The Sailor Moon Crystal made it more obvious that Usagi was like not really sure what to think of anything of this, but she's kind of a ditz kind of character, and the other characters didn't seem to care or even notice per se. So I think that it was more about Usagi's reaction, like she had never thought to think like, oh, you can be more than friends with a girl, maybe like that. And then Uranus even kind of like came onto her, but it was because she had a crush on her a little bit because she thought she was a guy at first, like because she dresses like a guy and acts kind of like a guy. And of course in Japanese there's male dialect and female dialect, and Uranus tends to like use more male type dialect, which is something that just doesn't translate to English at all. Like Spanish has that, but English has no equivalent, which I think it's kind of sad. It's kind of cool that there's like different ways to talk. But anyways, so it was a big deal that big deal for America, if you will, that these two would be lesbians or lovers or whatever. So they made them cousins because that makes sense. It's like, oh, they're close because they're cousins. Yeah. Yeah, the way that she's looking at her, that's the way that cousins look like. So they ruined it by by banning the actual relationship that they actually had, by changing that, because the censors were so scared spitless of how parents might react, how this group or that group might react, and so they censored it. Skeptic, is there any way to not make me echo?
Um,
Because I can't.
I don't know. Let me see. Let me see if I just mute myself while you talk and see if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Feel free to interrupt me. Um, okay. So, what was I saying? Oh, so that was because the right, let's just say conservative groups, not necessarily all conservatives, because you don't want to make, that sweeping generalization or whatever, but the media was afraid, if you will, of the noisy people that were against such things as how dare you show our kids a cartoon, because cartoons are for kids, even though anime is, for everybody. Cartoons are for everybody, whatever. But that wasn't really accepted for a while in the US. I don't even know. I guess today maybe it is, but at any rate, at the time, this, late early ish 90s, maybe mid 90s, I don't know. But at any rate, uh, so they were worried about the backlash from conservative types. And so that's why the censors did this change. Because they knew they'd never hear the end of it. If they had just had this anime and the two girls were in a relationship and nobody made a big deal of it, and they're holding hands. I think maybe they kissed once. I don't think they like it's not like on screen. It's not like that long. It's like kind of like in the shadows or whatever. Like it's very subtle, even if they, and I can't remember if they do or don't kiss in the Japanese one. But at any rate, whatever they did do was very subtle. It wasn't like all up in your face. And, it was romantic, and they just loved each other, and nobody questioned that. It was just normal. Well, the Christians and, evangel types would have written in and raised a fuss, and they would have never heard the end of it, or so they believe. Whether that's true or not, who knows? So they censored it. Okay. Now, you flash forward to today, and what you have is almost the opposite, where we're demanding now that you put in people that are lesbian or gay or whatever the thing is. You need to show that and not be afraid to show that. We are not going to shut up until we get that. Okay. Well, that's a swing from the pendulum from one side to the other. Now the noisy crowd appears to be those that want to see this. So that means less censorship in total. That's what would be the cure to this problem, is rather than having censorship one way or the other, have no censorship. Say, look, we're going to import this anime over here, and it is what it is. If you don't like it, don't watch it. If you like it, watch it. And we're not going to tell you what to do or not to do. And if you're a parent and you're worried about what your kid's doing, well, maybe be a parent and don't let them do that or whatever. But that's your responsibility, not ours. Your responsibility to block that anime from being able to be watched on their devices or whatever. Maybe we'll make that easy for you as a company, like give you some technological option to block certain categories because you want to, whatever. We'll do that for you, but it's still your responsibility. But that's not what the thing is, because it's not about anti-censorship. It's about control. The right, the conservatives wanted control, didn't want things said on TV, didn't want this or that portrayed on TV, didn't, think about the children. You hear this with video games. Oh, this game is so violent. This is why people are shooting up schools. The video game's a video game. No, it's not the video games. It's not that. That's not it at all. There's no association causation there. But they're looking for something to blame. Why? Well, if we demonize X and we say that that's the cause and we can control it, and then, well, control is good, because once we have control, then we can decide what is heard. people don't have the choice of what they hear, because what they hear is controlled by us, whoever that is, whether it's conservative or now more liberalistic types who want to say, well, we want the lesbian characters shown, but it's not because of what they say it is, but it is because we want to control the narrative. Now, I think that's broadly speaking. I don't think everyone obviously, has these motives necessarily, but that's what I think is going on. I could be wrong, because we're diving into potential motives of people and all that, but I don't see a shift in a solution to the problem, which would be, for me, would be no censorship at all. Zero. Zip zilch. None on the TV, none on movies, none on the radio. Say whatever words you want, whatever. But there still is. You have the ratings boards. Ever see the movie? There's a movie documentary called "This Movie is Not Yet Rated," that goes over how these rating things happen. That's a great thing to watch. Still relevant. How are games decided on what rating they get? And those are there to try to help parents that are concerned for their kids. Basically, okay, great, fine. Because, the whole thing of parental guidance suggested, the idea of that was supposed to be that the parent's supposed to go see the movie first, and then they decide if they bring their kid along. But nobody does that. They just bring their kids with them when they go see the movie. They both see it at the same time. Like, what are they going to do? Cover your eyes and ears during certain parts? Maybe. I don't know. But, so whether these guidelines work or not, I have no idea. But they are a type of censorship in a way, because if the movie is R, only certain people can see it. If the movie is X, and then it doesn't need triple X is pornography, but just X is basically like, I don't know, you have to do certain things to get that rating, or not rated or whatever. Only certain people can see it. So then they have to get rid of certain elements to not have it be censored in this way. So there is a type of censorship going on, and it's all about trying to please the most amount of people because you have a product to sell, and these labels are supposed to help you pick the product. But, well, just label it R or X or whatever you're going to label it, but let anyone see it that has the money to, and let it sort itself out. It's like, oh, but then the kids, what about the kids? Look, well, I don't know who, is it the state's responsibility or is it the parent responsibility? That whole argument, of course. But I think if you want to see more whatever in media, great. I think the solution to that is no censorship at all whatsoever, because I'm pure no censorship, I think, would be the way to go. Some people would argue, that's too far. We could debate that, Skeptic, if you want to. But so yeah, I mean, I saw the movie, the Raya Last Dragon. That was cool. It was interesting. It was a good movie. I didn't like the dragon's voice. I don't know why until the end. Like, I didn't like the personality of the dragon until the very end. I thought, oh, okay, now I like this personality. Like, so I was like, I think it would have been better to keep it a non-talking dragon, but whatever. Didn't have any music, wasn't a musical, so I think that was a good change of pace for Disney. But and it's like all these Asian whatever worked on it and were the actors and actresses. I'm like, great, cool. Wish they had done that with freaking Avatar: The Last Airbender when it was a movie, and that's so weird because the Last Airbender movie created this push for having movies make sense. And I think the website's racespending.com or something like that, where this was kind of a jumping off point. And I followed them for quite some time, where it's like every point they make about the Last Airbender is absolutely valid. The anime is clear who these people are, what they're based on, and you want to turn that into real life and not use people from those countries. That's just stupid. There's no reason. That was a movie where whitewashing was evident and inappropriate, and yet and directed by Shyamalan, who isn't this white guy. So you think he would know better? He puts all the Asian people as the bad guys. It's like, what is going on? And then there's cut footage of the Earth Tribe, who has a bunch of black people dressed up like the stereotype native black person. It's like, what is this guy thinking? What the hell? This is the wrong guy to direct. So I don't, so maybe it's a Hollywood problem of, we want to have all these people displayed. Great. You have to have a story where that makes sense. The story has to come first. It can't go the other way around. I think that's where they're going wrong. It's like, let's have the lesbian couple kiss on screen. Okay, then we'll build a story around that. No. Make a story about the characters, their lives, their struggles, their victories, whatever, and that they happen to be whatever. That's a side note. And if you want to do the movie where that's an issue that they have to deal with, okay, fine. If you want to do a movie where they're that way and that's just, who cares? Nobody mentions it. It's not pointed out. Maybe it's not even an issue for these characters. It's just something that they do. The story has to be paramount to that. And what I think this is where you get the token representation and all this from, where it's like, even with Sulu, like in the Star Trek movie, like you see him go walk off with this guy, and the guy, and then George Takei's like, no, Sulu wasn't gay. He wasn't written to be gay. I'm gay, but I'm not Sulu. So even he's like, no, I don't, that's not right. You're not, that I appreciate what they're, it's like, have it be a different character, because that character wasn't written to be that,
I'd like to jump in just.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, stop me before I. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to I don't know if Purple Rhymes with Orange left already, but just to clarify something in the comments we were talking about. The idea of representation being about minorities being portrayed accurately and not primarily as artificial stereotypes is contentious, because accuracy of a diverse set is not pragmatically something you can do. Gay people don't have an accurate type that you can represent in every single movie. They have a vast variety of different experiences, different opinions, different lives. Any description of a gay person you put on screen, there are going to be gay people that have different experiences and say, nope, that doesn't represent me. Regardless of whether you go with the sassy one or you go with the manly one, they're going to be like, nope, that doesn't represent me. So representation in that aspect, in my opinion, is not pragmatically doable. That's why I think the focus should be on the ideas rather than the individuals. So if you want to have a character to be gay and have the story work that in, so the story is saying, either it's saying, hey, they're gay, that's a thing, it's normal in this movie, deal with it, or B, hey, they're gay, that's the thing we're working up to, is it being normal, you got to deal with it. Either of those are fine. It's just not feasible to say represent gay people more accurately. Accurately to what? accurately to who? Gay people are not one solid thing that you can copy and paste and put in a movie. Same with black people, same with women, same with trans people, same with everybody. Asking for accurate representation is really asking for what you think accurate representation is, and your perception of what is accurate representation is no more or less valid than anyone else's. So that's my perspective on that. I just wanted to be
Yeah,
clear.
because I wasn't looking at chat while I was doing my little speech there or whatever, because I was just letting the thoughts flow. My thoughts, my ideas of this stuff. But yeah, okay, so representation is kind of like a more focused complaint, if you will, than to what I was saying then, right?
Yeah, the as far as I understand, I'm going to try to summarize the position as best I can and as charitably as I can. The position is essentially two things. One, it is that seeing individuals who look like you or who have your gender identity or sexual orientation, things like that, seeing that more in media makes you feel more empowered and makes you feel better, essentially, and validates your existence because it's being normalized because people are seeing it more. And in addition to that, it colors and controls the perceptions of people around you because people in general, according to Suris, get their base prejudices and biases from the media that they consume. So if we can change the media that they consume and make the negative representations positive, we can make them like gay people or see gay people in a different way. Like I said, my problem with that is two things with that. Number one, the idea that we should be and I use this analogy, I don't know if you were here for that, but blaming the Tide Pod challenge for people being dumb enough to eat Tide Pods, that is not an effective means of solving the problem. If you choose to get your information about any demographic, Asians, gay people, trans people, if you choose to get your perceptions of them from media, that's on you. That is your responsibility. That is you being stupid, and we should teach those people not to do that. We should encourage them to have skepticism instead of saying, "Pop Tide, you have to ban all your products. You have to ban all of them. We can't have any commercials." Why? Because people are eating them, and the correlation shows that when they see Tide Pod commercials, they eat the Tide Pods. So we have to get rid of Tide. That is bad, and we are not encouraging personal responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's my first problem. The second problem, I will let you speak just a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
The second problem in regards to the idea that it controls people's perceptions is, again, people need the freedom to make their own decisions, to decide what they like, who they like, what they don't like on their own. I don't think we should be in the business of trying to control that. But even if I put that issue to the side, like I said, I think the person he was responding to, his name is Appabend, he said something along the lines of, I don't care about representation. I get my validation from me and who I am. I don't need Hollywood or media to make me feel validated. That is good, in my opinion. That is the optimal state of affairs, to get someone to the point where they don't give a shit. And that is the goal that we should all be striving towards. Someone who is interested in minimizing harm is not going to encourage people to be susceptible to the media's perceptions of them. If you want people to get hurt less, you're not going to tell them that you should care more what Hollywood thinks. You should tell them to not give a shit and to find their validation from themselves, not to put their validation in the hands of Hollywood or media or whatever external thing you cannot control. At the end of the day, you validating yourself is the most healthy and optimal state of affairs that we should strive towards. Not us trying to say, let's, rework the Tide commercials so that they don't say eat the things. Like I said,
no, I think you should go the other way. I think you should make the commercials about eating the Tide Pod.
Of course. So my point, basically, I do think censorship is an interesting aspect to talk about, but that wasn't my biggest gripe. My biggest gripe was basically, just one second, just summarizing. My biggest gripe was basically, one is personal responsibility, and it is the responsibility of you as a person to not believe or not just mindlessly, skeptically, uncritically take things from movie and media. Not the responsibility of every single media out there to be accurate all the time. That's not pragmatic. That's not realistic. That's not going to happen. Number two, representation is bad because you are enabling people. You are not teaching them to seek validation from themselves. You are teaching them to seek validation from external things over which they have no control over, and that is unhealthy and bad and maximizes harm instead of minimizing harm. So those
Yeah.
are my 2 points. I'm gonna mute myself
Okay.
so we don't have the echo, but you can go now.
Okay, so on for your point of representation or what we're talking about, because I thought we're talking about one thing, which is like I want to see more this in media. Like Purple said, it's not Sailor Moon. The original had lesbians. Who cares? Whatever. But the American version was like, oh, we're Puritan. We can't do that. And that's a problem. We shouldn't have to like feel like we have to change things. It's like this is what it is. And to want or desire that we get rid of that, I think is fine. Like I don't have a problem with that. Um, it's like, okay, there is a difference between we need to get it to where movie people, TV people, radio people, whatever, YouTube's, we can say whatever the hell we want, however we want, and be whoever we are, and that none of that matters in the sense of it's not going to be that I when I watch a film or anime or whatever, um, I can the person or persons that are interesting, whether they're a cat or whatever gender, whatever the hell they might be, doesn't matter. If the character is what and the story is what I'm interested in, and that's where I put myself into. So that's what matters, not, oh, I have to see myself on the screen. And I think what you're saying, SS, if I'm right, is that this movement seems to be more about, I need to see me on the screen. I need to see me on that billboard. Well, it's not me, but it's somebody that looks just like me and talks like me and acts like me and has my culture. And if I don't see that, then that's really bad. It's like, okay, I get that, but why not we get to a point where you see whatever it is that you see, and great, it's there. There's nothing to stop it from being shown. But like you said, we don't need to have it. Like there's a difference between we're going to show the people they happen to be, uh, green midgets from space, whatever. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something non-offensive. Well, midgets probably offended somebody. Green blobs from space. There we go. Okay, and they all they visit Earth and they consume humans, and at first you're like, oh, they're the villains, and they're like, no, we just eat. This is just what we do. We just eat. We just eat humans. That's how we survive. And there's a story there, right? You could see yourself relating to the character if the character is made to be interesting, and there's aspects of it that you're going to root for, there's aspects you're going to root against, you're going to sympathize with it. But to say, well, no, we need to redo that movie, but we need to cast trans, lesbian, non-binary, non-white, handicapped person as the blob character so that I can see myself on the screen, and then that will be a victory. And then they make that movie and it sucks because they not only did they do that, but they also changed other things about the movie, and then so what you wind up with is like, look, we got representation, and you're like, yeah, but the movie sucks and nobody liked it. You know, it's like what they did with Ghostbusters, right? But maybe they did Ghostbusters deliberately bad to get the paycheck, the tax write off thing, like the producers or something. I don't know, but
I do have a thought, but I wanted to let you finish first.
yeah,
I do
yeah,
have
yeah.
something to say though.
So in the original Star Trek, there's an episode where Uhura meets Abraham Lincoln. He's not really Abraham Lincoln, but he's basically Abraham Lincoln. And he says, "Oh, a lovely negress," or whatever. And then he's like, "Oh, like, sorry, I misspoke," or whatever. And she's like, "No, it's fine." And Kirk says, like, we don't care anymore. Like, we are what we are, whatever. And I'm like, that's the attitude that we should aim at in and make the write the great story about X, Y, and Z. There's nothing to stop somebody from doing that. I'm fine with, yeah, I want to see whoever, whatever on the screen, but like you said, it's not about validating me. And I think that that's where the problem is desiring validation from, like you said, from an external source rather than an internal source. Um, and you know, there's a nuance here of, I get what you want, but let's get what you want in a way that makes sense, and also at the same time, the why you want it, maybe we should challenge that, because I would love I would love to see, you know, a movie that I could relate to where, you know, it happens to be, you know, heterosexual or homosexual, sorry, whatever characters. That's fine. You know, if the story is good, I don't care. Um, you know, and I'd also like to see a movie, maybe a documentary or an actual movie where you have a transsexual, because I don't get that. I don't understand that. And I would like to be able to understand that. And maybe that might help me to do that. So there's nothing to prevent somebody from making that, as far as I know. So rather than just go, I want it. Well, then go and make it then. Make it yourself. If you want to see it, then do it yourself. Right?
Or you could encourage other people, because indie films are a thing, and indie films are much more diverse than Hollywood films tend to be. But I want to put that to the side. I know Purple Rhymes with Orange left for the night, but he made a very good point I wanted to touch on. The idea that, and Suris made this point too, that it's not exclusively, individual validation is a point, but it's not just about that. The other side is about public perception of minorities. And my problem with that is, what you are suggesting is to control public perception of minorities. Not only is that just usurping freedom, but that is not a productive means of achieving the goal that you want. As far as I understand it, if we're talking about the most problematic members of society, they will not behave differently because people are portrayed differently. If you have someone who is racist against Hispanic individuals, portraying Hispanic individuals in a positive light will not deter them in any way. Furthermore, even if it did, that is too authoritarian for me. That is a very bad precedent to set, because that can easily come back and bite you in the ass. Because you want to control public perception of minorities to be what you want that public perception to be. You want to change the public perception to a specific thing. And while that might be your power right now, when the pendulum swings the other way around, your opposition is going to do the exact same thing to you. They are going to want to change the public perception of the gays by changing how they are portrayed. And that's the problem. That's why I think we need to focus on teaching people, hey, be skeptical of the right, be skeptical of the left, be skeptical of Christians, be skeptical of atheists, be skeptical of everything, rather than going, okay, you're an atheist, you can't act this way because that makes atheists look bad. You're a Christian, you can't act this way because that makes them look bad. And we have to make people look good so that we can get people around me to not, be that way. Sirius gave an example, to be more specific. He said he identified in the past, not now, to be clear, in the past he identified who was gay by the media he consumed and if they had those sort of stereotypes. The problem is, one, that is Suris's problem. That means that's something he should not have done, and he should take the personal responsibility to not do that. But number two is, and he acknowledged this later, there are individuals who are gay who act like that. There are individuals who are gay who look at that representation and say, that is good, that is great, that represents me, I am happy, I am fine with that.
Yeah.
The problem you have now is both of you are in contradiction, because Suris said that that's offensive, and the gay person who actually does that is probably like, no, that's great.
Well,
who am I supposed to believe? Who are we supposed to endorse? How are we supposed to portray minorities? We can't portray them all kinds of ways in every single media. But we also can't portray them in any specific kind of way, because then it's offensive or it's stereotypical or it's this or it's that.
Well,
and I'm not saying it's not. It very much is a stereotype.
It can
but
be.
I'm saying that you have to understand the conversation is centered, whether it's intentional or not, it's centered around individuals. You want minority representation to be what you think it should be. And that is not good enough to sway public opinion or to sway my opinion. We don't even
know what public opinion is per se, or how to gauge that anyway.
Yeah, but even if we did, but
without
even if we,
data or whatever,
which is a whole separate thing. There was no data mentioned in either video. There were no citations. There was no studies. Nothing. It was just Suris saying things, and I deliberately asked him, like,
that's
Suris,
what we're doing too.
Where's your skepticism? Well, no. Here's the thing. My thing
but I'm
is
not
this:
making an argument.
yeah, but also I am
yeah,
criticizing the points that he's making, but I also explain and demonstrate my points. Here's why I think it would be healthy and good for this. Suris did not to do that. He would just go, "Oh, it's good." So
with this, because
sorry, I'm gonna let you interject.
Yeah, I thought of this while you were talking, how like in a lot of movies that I can think of, or maybe not a lot, but like the magical black man or mystical black woman or whatever, where like I don't know, the Green Mile, or what the bleep is the movie? But anyways, the big giant black guy, like he's about to be executed or whatever, and he heals this rat and like heals this guy, and then he helps everybody out, and then like they know he's innocent, but they have to kill him, and then they do, and then everybody touches him and he comes back to life or whatever. And that's it. That's how the movie ends. It's like, okay, or whatever, But you had this like the all-knowing, wise black person as like a response by certain people in Hollywood of, well, look at how we portrayed them in the past. So we have to go the other way. We have to make them superhuman. Or like the noble Native American. Like, oh, they're so spiritual, and here's the one that's crying because of the trash and all this, and they're all environmentalists. Like, that's not reality at all. That is okay, let's be brave and bold. Let's have a movie or a television show where you have somebody that happens to be, fill in the blank, and they're a bad guy. They're a bank robber and they've killed people, and they're gay. Oh man, that would piss people off. Oh, how dare you have a gay person be a bad person? Well, yeah, because they can be bad. I mean, just because you're whatever doesn't mean you can't make the wrong decisions in life.
Exactly. There was I don't know if you've seen the commercials. I think I did streams on them. If not, I was going to, but they aggravated me far too much for me to have a genuine conversation about it. But Black History Month, they had the whole Crystal Gems doing their whole shtick about Black History Month and things like that. And that is and probably will be a whole stream unto itself. But the problem, as it pertains to this conversation, is the same that it is with most things, in that because Pearl I don't know if you know the series Steven Universe, but Pearl of Steven Universe said, "Tell the full story," and then she went on to go on about Lewis Latimer and how he would be more accurately credited for the invention of the light bulb. The problem is that is not the full story, because Lewis Latimer was working at a lighting company that existed beforehand. And that is the problem. You want us to show the good during Black History Month. You want to show the good parts of Black History Month, but we don't talk about the black shooters. We don't talk about the black warlords. We don't talk about the black evil people. We don't talk about the black people who did the most terrible, unspeakable things. We don't talk about the black slave owners. We talk about the good things because we want to control public perception and make black people look good.
Whatever, yeah.
But that's the problem. Like, I understand that that's what you want to do, right? But what you have to understand is that you are not portraying reality. If you want to make the case that we should portray absolutely everyone in a positive light all the time, make that argument. I might not agree with it, but make that argument. But what you're not going to do is say, you're not telling the whole story because you have only white people. So now we're going to have black people, but only the good sides. Only the good things. We'll talk about white people, and we'll talk about how they were pirates. We'll talk about how they were slave owners. We'll talk about how they were warlords. We'll talk about all the horrible crimes they did. And that's whitewashing history. So we're going to add in black people, but we're only going to talk about their inventions, the things they revolutionized, the way they changed the world, and that's it. We will not talk about any of their negative aspects because that would give the impression that black people are human and have bad sides. Yeah, and we can't have that.
It's like, here's the first black baseball guy. Here's the first black mobster.
Yeah, but you're not gonna see that.
But yeah, but that'd be cool. Like, who cares? See, that's the thing, is that we, this is getting into racism and all that. It's like, well, the best way I think to promote racism is to care about color, because I don't care what your skin is. It's just, I'm so done with that. It's like everybody's racist for everything now. Oh, you're racist.
Hey, just want to acknowledge Math Pig joined us. Hey, Math Pig. Hey, feel free to contribute in the chat. We're just talking about representation in media.
We need more lobsters, and
we need more skeletons. That's what we need.
Yeah, we need living, walking skeletons.
Now, to that, you might say, there are plenty of skeletons in the graveyard. And I'm like, yes, but we need more representation of other people in graveyards.
I saw skeletons, they were the bad guys, and they got beaten by
matter of fact, I think there's an underrepresentation of people in graveyards. We need more living human beings in caskets, because there are too many there's too many skeletons there.
And all that. Jason and the Argonauts.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, but this actually, as we're joking around, that reminds that reminds me of something very important. Because they, as he was responding to Appa-Ben, they got into anime and stuff. So, oh no, go ahead. I appreciate you. I appreciate you stopping by, Math Pig. I will definitely reach out. Via Twitter. That's the better way. That's the easier way for me to communicate. So, Math Pig, I will definitely DM you tomorrow morning, if not tonight at some point. Have a good night, and thanks for stopping by.
It was great to do that interview with him, and then I missed that interview with that other person. I don't remember.
The biggest thing I had with representation is, even like putting everything else we've already described aside, is, does it have the impact that you say it does? Because it's very easy to say, oh, well, it does this and it does that and it does that and it does this. But demonstrating that is a separate thing. For example, he used anime because he says that adding a black person adds a unique experience to the story. He said something that was very much, in my opinion, a hasty generalization. Yes, I will follow you on Twitter. A very hasty generalization. He said, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, he said, if you're black, you probably can relate to some part of Will Smith's experience.
Wait, Will Smith or the actual person, or
Will Smith, the character of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
Right. Yeah.
And that is, in my opinion, a hasty generalization, because he said, poverty, getting screwed over by the system, those are things you can probably relate to. And
but he wasn't screwed over. He got
whether you intend it this way or not, That's racist. You're making assumptions about a person's experience based on their skin color. And as of this video I'm talking about, you have not demonstrated that any of that has anything to do with being black. You are saying, you are doing the very thing that you have a problem with. You are telling me, a neutral party, to be black is to be screwed over by the system. To be black is to be poor. To be black is to be insert thing here. And when you meet a black person, enter in with these biases and these preconceptions. And I'm saying, no, you fucking dolt. Don't do that when you meet President Obama, because that's fucking retarded. You have to meet people as individuals with no biases about them and then judge them as they are.
Well,
you have to come in with as few assumptions as possible. Do not encourage assumptions. I don't care if they're positive. Do not do that. Because there are so many people in poverty. And if you wanted to get hyper technical about numbers, and I could get into this later, if anyone has a problem, I will bring a citation about it. Just message me or whatever. But technically, because there are more white people in America, there are more white people in poverty. It's more of a white thing. But you are encouraging the idea that it's more of a black thing, and that getting screwed over by the system is more of a black thing, rather than an everybody thing. You're not talking about all the people, and this is what I was talking about with share the full story stuff. You're not talking about all the people who get screwed over the system, the black ones, the minority ones, the trans ones. The problem isn't people are getting screwed over by the system. The problem is minorities are getting screwed over by the system.
Well, it's everybody.
That is
Anybody can be. That's the
yes.
thing.
But to portray it as otherwise is the problem.
Yeah,
when you do that, you make the problem harder to solve, because I'm trying to cure cancer, but you want me to cure the black cancer first, rather than cure cancer.
Right.
And that makes the problem harder to solve.
Well, Fresh Prince, you also have a successful black guy that's a judge. You know, that's the dad who's a loving guy, and you know, and then you have the nerd, and you know, and Carlton, and then you have the gal that only cares about fashion, and you know, and so you have kind of stereotypical motifs of people, but they all you know, there you know, it's more
I
you
get
know,
what you're saying.
yeah, it's supposed to be a culture clash between being low economy living to high economy living. That's the joke, not about they happen to be black. Like, to me, that's how I. But I don't care that. Yeah, but then again, I don't care that they're.
But I'm sorry, I got sidetracked in my main point. My main point I wanted to make was when Suris says the things he does about representation, it begs a question like this. You know Goku, right? Goku is technically an alien Saiyan. So, what functionally, as far as my relationship to Goku is concerned, if I relate to Goku as a character, because he said that depending on a character's race, they can make it easier or harder to relate to them.
What?
So I beg the question, why would I relate to Goku any more or less if he was anything other than what he was? If Goku was a woman, I wouldn't just suddenly relate less. It wouldn't impact my ability to enjoy the show. I might wonder why, but it doesn't seem to have the impact that he says it has. Now, he did give a better example. He said, for example, let's say you're introducing someone who's like an adult, not a child, but like an adult to anime. Which is going to be easier for them to consume? Something that is English subbed or something that is dubbed? And my point is that doesn't matter at all. Because if they're going to get into it, they're going to get into it regardless of which method they use. It doesn't particularly matter. Now, that was kind of a hyper-specific example. He was responding to Apaben saying something about America always makes remakes of things, and that's xenophobic, which is a whole other stupid point. But that's a whole other stupid point. We're not going to go there, Lobster. We're not going to go there. We're not going to go there, Lobster. But as far as this particular point is concerned, you are suggesting that it is easier or harder to relate to characters based on their race. That's the point of representation. And I want to know how that works exactly. If Will Smith turned out to be white, how would that change my experience of watching the show as a skeleton? Would I just be like, oh well, I can't relate as much? That
Yeah,
makes
I
it
mean, that
harder.
sounds, to me, honestly, that sounds racist. Like, I can't relate to them unless they happen to share my skin tone.
Now, also, Appaben made that point, and Suris said, no, that's not what we're saying. We're not saying you
Well,
can't
what
relate.
you-
We're saying that it's easier to relate,
That's
or that
still
it's harder
racist.
to relate.
That's still
And
racist.
that's still,
because
it's,
you assume that people are going to be easier to relate because they happen to share your skin tone. That's
but that's
still
not,
racist.
but that's not his reason though, or at
I
least
don't-
his stated reason. His stated reason, and I counted 3 times, he brought up personal anecdotes, and then had the audacity to bitch at Appaben about personal anecdotes and overdonations. But he said something to this extent. And anyone, go watch the video, do your own research. Don't just believe things I say. Go find it for yourself. He said, I used to live on the street full of black people. I was in a poor white family, and I was the only white person on my street. The black people on my street in the same economic status had he said something along the lines of they probably or most likely had a different life experience than he did.
How do you know that?
And then just walked exactly. How do you know that? You have no
Unless
frame
you
of
talk
reference.
to
You just
them or-
assumed that they have a
like-
different life experience. And
well,
that's
yeah,
the
I mean,
thing.
technically everyone's going to have a different life experience.
Yes,
yeah.
but he's not assuming it
But-
because they're different people. He's assuming it because they're different colors. And he didn't explain it, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
I'm trying my best to charitably interpret you. But here's what you said for verbatim. I'm the only white person on the block. Black people live on my block. We definitely have different experiences. That's it.
Well,
That's all you said. And
I'd like
from that,
to-
the most charitable thing I can extrapolate is you think that being a different race automatically lends different experiences, which I really want to know how you verify that. How do you test that? How do you prove that? Because at the end of the day, if you change Vegeta's skin tone to be darker, I'm not gonna be, oh no, he's different now. Like there was anyone who's a nerd who watches Dragon Ball Super will know this. There was a point where Vegeta was fighting purple Vegeta, but purple Vegeta could do all the same stuff regular Vegeta could do, and nobody was like, oh my god, he's purple. I can't deal with it. He's different. Like Super Saiyan hair color changes all the time. It's not like Goku was black, but now he's blonde, so now I can't. I just, my ability to relate to him has gone down. I can still do it, but it's harder for some reason. Why is it harder for some reason? Because if he looks like me, then it's easier. Never mind the fact that he don't actually look like you. He just has your skin tone. Your facial structure doesn't match. You look nothing alike. Like Suris tried to compare himself to Tony Stark. No offense to Suris, because he tried to say Tony Stark would represent him. Suris, Tony Stark looked nothing like you. That's not to mention the fact that I don't know Tony Stark's ethnicity. That's not to mention the fact that the whole white thing isn't even a thing, because you could go into different subtypes of being white and stuff.
Okay. Skeptic,
I gotta
You
bring it down. I gotta bring it down. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You've gone deconverted man. Never go full deconverted man.
I'm sorry. It is late.
Let me do a dumb joke. Come on.
Yes. Do a dumb joke, please.
Vegeta, what does the scouter say about his racism level? You see Goku, he's turning black. It's over, Doc. That's it.
Yo, mama's so fat. When
What?
Vegeta
Okay,
asked about her weight, when Nappa asked about her weight, Vegeta said, it's over 9,000.
The all black guy that's in DBZ is not a black human. Like, he is an alien that's black, I think.
Actually, he's
Am
a
I
genie.
wrong?
He's a
Oh,
genie.
he's a genie.
So
Okay,
here's the thing. I have to
They
address
changed him
quickly.
to like purple, didn't they? At one point.
They tried to. So here's what happened with that. In Japanese folklore, there is a sort of spiritual creature that looks like Mr. Popo, that has literally black, not brown, not dark brown, but literally black skin and those lips. If you play the Pokemon games, you remember
Yeah,
there's a Pokemon that
yeah.
looks similar to that, and they are
Yeah,
both
yeah.
derived
Jinx.
from the Japanese folklore. They are not meant to
They
be
turn
racial
purple.
things. But in America, where people make everything about race, they changed him to be blue.
Yeah.
If you watch Team 4-Star, they do parody stuff. They had
Yeah, I
Black
love that.
Popo assimilate him. He was like,
Yeah.
"What's going on here?" He was like, "Oh, I am Blue Popo. I am made to be more racially sensitive." And Mr. Popo was like, "Nope, we're not doing this. Prepare to be assimilated." And then he assimilated him, and that's what happened. And that
Yeah, I
is
mean,
great.
because
That
see,
is a
now-
great way to talk
So what
about
you've
it
done,
and
what
have
you've
it be
done is you
featured.
negate this whole thing about cultural appropriation and all that BS, which is just nonsense because everything's based on something else, whatever. It's
Yeah,
like, I respect
yeah.
your culture. That's why I want to assimilate it. I like it. Why
Yeah.
would that be? Anyways, whatever. That's a whole
So,
nother kit
yeah,
and
it
caboodle.
is. I
But it's
do
like,
want to wrap up because it
yeah,
is
okay,
getting
okay,
kind of late. I have my final thoughts, but I want to let you
Okay,
want to let you share your final thoughts first.
yeah.
Let me know when you're done.
Right. So you're gonna say, okay, we're gonna take Popo or whatever and make him not be black because we're worried about people thinking that he's portraying a stereotype of black. But then you're negating the age and culture that where if you actually looked into it, you would find out that this character is this other thing, and so you are negating one culture in favor of a different culture. So it's all you're screwing somebody over when you do. So no matter what, somebody's getting screwed over.
So yeah, for the sake of wrapping up, I am going to try to address my points briefly and not go full deconverted man again.
Only I can do the rant.
Yes, I know. As far as the of projection, Suris in this particular video, I'm not making any generalizations about other videos, but in this video, he made a hasty generalization when he assumed that Tony Stark represented him just because they sort of kind of maybe have the same skin tone, and it's easier to relate to Tony Stark than it would be if Tony Stark was a different skin color and then not explain that point. That is a problem. If you're going to say that, you have to substantiate the points you make or else remove the title of Skeptic from your name. And
could have said it's easier for me to relate.
But that's what he said, easier for me, which leads to my final point. Projection. So many times in this video, he uses himself as an example of something and then projects that to be typical human behavior. He doesn't show a study or a citation that proves it. He says, well, I personally grew up, I figured out if someone was gay by those stereotypes. Therefore, that's what everyone does. I personally, I don't have that problem as representation because Tony Stark represents me. And it's like, this isn't about you. And the fact that you personalized it and brought up anecdotes and then later complained about Appaben, the guy he was responding to, complained about him bringing up anecdotes is hilarious to me. So there's a million things I could rant about, but that's my main thing that I wanted to end on was you don't get to project your personal anecdotes into a story and then just walk away like, oh, I was the only white person on my block. Everyone else was black. They definitely had a different experience than me, and then just like not finish that thought, not justify it, not substantiate it, nothing. At this point, after watching the video as much as I did, you just had two people saying some things without evidence, and that's fine. But I'm going to tell you something that neither of them told you. Don't believe me. Don't believe Deconverted Man. Don't believe Appabend. Don't believe Suris. Do your own research. Be skeptical. Come to your own conclusions and actually try to figure out whether or not representation is something you are in favor of or not in favor of. Do not believe random skeletons, lobsters, or anime Rule 63 waifus on the internet. Make up your own decision and think for yourself. That also means think for yourself whether or not you are responsible for the stupid thoughts you consume or whether the media is responsible for the stupid thoughts you consume. That is my ending point. That's all I've got to say about that. I'm going to officially end the broadcast here because we've gone way overboard.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Yes,
Goodbye. Not to me, to
mostly
him.
comments. I very much want
Comment.
comments. I want feedback.
Tell
If you
me he's
disagree with
wrong.
me, if you disagree with me, I have to do the hashtag debate me in the ring, but not really. If you disagree with me, I genuinely would love to hear other people's perceptions. And even I'll go this far. I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to. I'll go as far as to
don't do
say,
it. No, that's a bad idea.
nope,
Just end the stream. No, end the stream. Don't trust me.
I
What are
have,
we gonna say?
I have to do this.
No, you don't. Don't
On
do it,
the
man.
off occasion that Suris comes across this video, I am willing to have a conversation about the subject matter. Privately, publicly, because I know if I ask for a collab, people are going to call me a clout chaser. So if you want to do it privately, that's fine too.
You're just doing it to get attention because you're a narcissist.
Yeah, of course. But my point is, I am open to disagreement, and I am open to dissenting opinion. I want to hear from people who disagree with me. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your arguments. I want to hear your points. So anyone, please reach out, contact me, comment, find me on Twitter, DM me, anything. If you disagree with me, please challenge me and do not believe me. So that's all I have to say.
Not the skeleton.
What'd you say?
Attack the arguments, not the skeleton.
Precisely. And on that note, I will officially end the broadcast. If
right.
by some
Goodbye.
Miracle of the God that doesn't exist, you made it this far,
I don't know.
bless you. Bless you. Bless
now
you and your blessed
and I'm going to say all the terrible things because nobody made it this far, so I can say whatever the hell I want. Here we go.